Good morning, everybody. Thank you, and welcome to the March, 31st of March. I got one day ahead of myself there. 31st of March meeting of the Somerset Board. We're here in the lateral room at County Hall and live and online. Can I just check, first of all, that everybody online can hear correctly? I can see Councillor Graham Oakes has a very blurry thumb. I hope that's not a medical condition, but I'm sure you are well placed to deal with it. Do we have any members of the public present? Just board members, I think, isn't it? Okay. I'd just like to formally welcome Kim Sadler. Kim, welcome to the board, who's the manager of Health Watch Somerset, new member of the Somerset board. Also, it will be last board meetings for Mel Locke and Lisa Simpson, and I'm not seeing them are here. Also for Paul von der Heide, the vice chair. Thank you to Mel and Lisa in absentia, and thank you very much for all your hard work and your sterling work as vice chair and stepping in when I'm not been available, Paul. It'd be hugely appreciated. I'm sure you will keep in touch, and good luck in your new role with hospitals to the east of us. That's right. And all the joys and challenges that will bring. So also Steve Taylor from the Cabot Learning Federation has also had to step back from the role, and we'll thank him also for his time and contribution. Okay, so with the agenda pack with the papers is available on ModGov or directly from the council websites, for which the link was set out with the agenda. They are viewed electronically, so if you're referring to page numbers, can you refer to the page numbers on the public agenda pack so that everybody can catch up with where you're referring to? And in line with our usual protocols at Somerset Council, could we ask people to turn microphones off and videos off? And I'm looking at you, Councillor Graham Oakes, also Ruth Taylor. If you could just pop your videos off, please, that would be great. Thank you. It just helps us with our bandwidth, with our Wi-Fi at County Hall, which isn't always magnificent. If you do wish to speak online, can you use the hands up function and state clearly who you are when you speak? Can I? Otherwise, the chat function, please, can we not use it, or only for purposes of the meeting in exceptional circumstances? We're not expecting a fire alarm, I believe. Should this happen, Somerset Council colleagues will lead the way into the car park at the rear of the building, where you will be accounted for. So we move on to our agenda items. Agenda item 1 is apologies for absence. Rizard.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So we've received apologies from Jonathan Higman, Lisa Simpson, Bernie Marden, Gavin Ellis, although Gerald Taylor is appearing online, Alan Jones and Catherine Nolan this morning.
Okay, we're happy to accept those apologies, I assume. Which brings us on to agenda item 2, which is the minutes from our previous meeting on the 24th of November. Are there any concerns or corrections that anybody has with those minutes, please? Not seeing anybody. Are we happy for me to sign as a true and accurate record? Everyone's sort of nodding in general assent. So duly signed. Passed on, so then I don't lose them. I have track record. Any declarations of interest? Any declarations of interest in today's agenda?
I should just mention that with effect from tomorrow, I become chair of BSW Group of Hospitals, which is Royal United Hospital Bath, Great Western Hospital Swindon, and Salisbury Foundation Trust.
And good luck with those roles. I think we would all say it's an interesting time in NHS reorganisation at the moment, along with so many parts of the public sector. Moving on to public question time. I believe we have no public questions. And so we're on to agenda item 5, which is the Somerset Board Action Tracker and Work Programme. Rizard.
Thank you, Chair. So board members will remember we created an action tracker last time that's been updated since the last meeting in November, with relevant updates on those actions and activity. Most of them are closed up or completed, or they've moved on to the work programme, which I'll move to in a second. The only thing that's outstanding is still that link between us and the housing side. I met recently with the 2 chairs of the homelessness partnership. So we're still continuing to build that link and understand how best we can work together as boards, how we can link the work across essentially. So that's the only thing from the actions tracker side. So I'll pause there in case there's any questions, Chair, on the action tracker before I move on to the work programme, if that's okay.
Heather.
Thank you, and great to see the action tracker and the work programme. And so my question kind of straddles the two, so it's probably a good time. Obviously, I looked in the tracker to see where we were with the child poverty thing that was discussed last time, and it kind of feels a bit abrupt when it's closed now, but of course that's because it's moved on to the work programme. So I guess when you come on the work programme, I've got a question about where child poverty sits there, but I think it might just be, it feels, and I know its process is absolutely accurate to say it's been closed, but it just feels a little bit kind of, ooh, we've sorted that, which I know you don't mean.
No, that's a very valid point, Heather, in that regard, and that does lead me nicely onto the work programme. So the idea is that to avoid that almost staying on the action tracker and it's being sort of monitored that way, but instead it's moved to the work programme. So board members will hopefully have seen that I've created a work programme for the board which lays out the year ahead of us, where we are meeting, what reports we are receiving at what dates. Some of those are statutory reports as well, or the ones that we receive on an annual basis. But also I've started to be able to pepper in just additional items as they come up through the year. At the start of that work programme document, we clearly lay out the Improving Life Strategy priorities, so we can clearly see that they're the 4 priorities that should be steering the work of the board in that regard. But I've also included in areas of focus, which is where the board members through discussion have identified topics or themes that they are keenly interested in exploring further as a board, just so we can almost start to say, well, actually, this is the stuff we'd like to cover then as a board. Where am I seeing that populate throughout the year in terms of our actual work programme? So this is certainly going to mature as a document as we go forward. Child poverty is a good example where it's currently listed as an area of focus, but we haven't yet necessarily identified how as a board we want to explore that theme and particularly what action we'd like to see as a result of the board exploring it, if that makes sense.
Brilliantly done. No, but I think that sounds fantastic. I went back to we just signed off the minutes, of course. I looked at what was in the minutes as well about what we agreed, and there's words there about, evidencing and KPIs and auditing things and so on. So there's quite a lot of word in there. So it's just, I don't know, what I don't understand now is how we move from it being an area of focus to being, and how do we do that outside of these meetings or in these meetings? How do we then track those things through?
So I suppose from my perspective, Heather, there's an element of some sponsorship of that activity, some recommendations from board members as to how best to approach that. There's also obviously, as we start to populate the workshops through the year as well, we could identify that actually that's a theme within a broader workshop, particularly when we come to the 3rd priority, maybe around fairer life chances and opportunities for all. We might say, actually, that's a good opportunity to explore that as part of that. So it's almost understanding, I suppose, whether these areas of focus are almost insular and they're one-off things that we want to pick up as an item or as a workshop in itself, or whether they are themes that run throughout discussions that we have, really. So I'd be looking to board members to advise best on how to approach it. I can obviously link up with other officers as needed as well, from advice from experts as well.
Yeah, Rish has actually just proposed what I was going to suggest in terms of joining up the child poverty work with our review in October around improving lives and fairer life chances for all. But I think there's probably some preparation work we could do in advance of that. So maybe what if we agree today, these topics, we need to get little working groups established so that we can do the work ahead of coming into a workshop and come up with something sensible. But I also had a question as well, Bill. So just looking at the work programme and the year's schedule, I'm mindful that our strategy runs out in 2028. So is the is the purpose of these workshops to review those areas, identify, have we had an impact, what progress have we made, and then make a suggestion about how we tackle those in a new strategy going forwards? I don't know. It would be helpful to understand that a bit more, please.
Thanks, Alison. I suppose to some degree, I think we were going to develop that really as we go forward. My inclination would be that I think the second part of that, of what the new strategy or a revised strategy should contain, will naturally come about in the same conversation. I think we'll find it difficult. Hopefully, it will find it difficult as a board to not be able to look forward. So I think the workshops that we have that almost reflect on how is it gone and have that deep dive will naturally have the conversation flow into. But what we'd like to tweak is X, Y, and Z. So I would expect that they're part of the same conversation, and we're almost reviewing and to some degree drafting what part of the new strategy may contain moving forward. But again, I'll be led by board members as to whether you wanted a different approach. Hopefully the programme itself allows enough time to do a reflective look back throughout the workshops in the year, and then almost have additional workshops start of next year to properly attack a new strategy or a revised strategy. So we're open. I'm open to both opportunities, I suppose, in a way. Is the best way of putting it.
Okay, so should we seek to get some volunteers to start working on those workshops, particularly the first couple, so that we get really good engagement and we're not yes, that we use the time really effectively.
Sorry, it's very important stuff. So I'm really pleased with discussing it. And I agree with everything people are saying. I think absolutely, I think we should be working ahead of time. A couple of things I want to say was when we get the volunteers, it'd be really good that they do represent all of the partnership as widely as we can. Okay, that becomes a voluntold rather than volunteer, but try and get people across the thing. And I think just in picking up on something, I probably misunderstood what you were saying, Rish, but in terms of, I think I'm saying Rish, sorry, are you sure? Sorry about that. Don't want to give you a Sunday name. Is that the areas of focus that are listed there are all the wicked issues which will run through all of the areas. I can't see anything on there on the areas of focus that are kind of insular. So I think they may be things that we have to think about, but I'm doing all of them all at once. Everything everywhere all at once might be too much. But I think I like the idea of getting ahead of time. But if we can get the spread in the volunteers, it'd be good.
That's correct. And certainly in terms of the first one around the economic and infrastructure links, things like that, I've already reached out to the growth board members to see whether any of the growth board want to attend economic growth board, as well as our economic development colleagues in the council as well. So I've started to, I suppose, bring in outside expertise and outside knowledge for that particular workshop because it's the first one up. So I've started seeding the ground in that regard. But yes, absolutely, wherever there's wider partnerships we want to be involved all the way through this, we'll be doing that. But I suppose what Alison's looking for to some degree is almost like a lead member to assist on the corralling of that to some degree.
Happy to help if I can.
There we go, Corolla in chief. There we go, a new name. It doesn't come with a hat, I don't think. Yeah. Okay. Anything else on this agenda item? No, we're all happy. So we move on to agenda item 6, which is the ICB cluster update. And David, I think you're presenting.
Yep, thank you, Chair. The slides were circulated in advance. I'm just going to trip through some of those and speak a bit more detail on some than others. So I'm David McLean, I'm the Place Director for Somerset ICB. I'll just give an update on the reorganisation. As the Chair has already said, there's quite a lot of changes within health at the minute and across the wider public sector. The presentation and the slides you've got just gives a thumbnail sketch really of those changes and the scale within the ICB locally. So the first slide then talks through the geography, the new geographic footprint, which spans 4,000 square miles, so quite a big stretch of the southwest. Clearly, from the context of this board, there's conversations ongoing about the Baines and Swindon element of this in the longer term, given the combined authority, strategic authority conversations in those areas. But that is the footprint as it is at the moment. And the big shift, there's a couple of big big shifts that we're keen to make. It's not just about the footprint of the organisation changing. It's about the nature of the organisation, what it does changing as part of this reform. Very much pivoting to focus on outcomes, not just on the volume of care being delivered. That's often been a critique of the NHS in terms of its focus on targets and the timeliness and access to care. So there will be an element of that in the early days, there's no doubt, as we wean ourselves off and towards more population health outcomes and a focus around that. And then the other bit then, the big change is around focusing not just on the financial value of what we do, but on the wider sort of aspects of value that's being delivered for the money that we've got. And I'll come on to touch on the budget that the organisation has. But those are the two big changes that we're seeking to drive as part of this, is our focus on outcomes and then looking at the value we get from the money that we invest in healthcare right across that cluster. And I guess moving to the bigger scale that you can see enables us to develop that capability and to start to leverage that. And I'll come on to talk about that in a second as well. So next slide, please, Rishi. So just in terms of, I guess, a bit of a thumbnail sketch in terms of the organisations, that's the population coverage across that cluster. And as people know, it's a sort of dispersed rural area and some coastal communities, urban centres, and about 10% of the population made up the armed forces community across the cluster, but that's also true of Somerset with about 50,000 armed forces. And that's kind of, for us, it's an early focus in terms of how we commission services for this armed forces community. And we've already got armed forces link workers in place within Somerset. And so one of the earlier pieces of work for us will be trying to ensure we can commission for that population specifically. And that's a bit of a step in the direction of where we'll be heading more generally. On the right hand side, really, it's just an idea of the complexity in primary care. So working at scale now will enable us to manage the market around, particularly around pharmacy and optometry and dental services, but just some of the complexity around general practice relative to some of the simplicity around the acute sector that you can see on the slide. The next slide then just gives a bit of a thumbnail in terms of the overall cluster budget, just for context really. It's a commissioning budget of about £8 billion. And that's how it's kind of roughly split at present. That delegated commissioning bit is a bit of a misnomer because we host specialised budgets. So that's the commissioning of services largely at the tertiary centres, particularly in Bristol. But you can see the balance of our spend at present. And clearly over time, we're keen to try and invest more in preventative services and shift the dial on what we can do through community and through primary care services as well. So that's just to give a bit of context in terms of the spend profile within the organisation itself. I wasn't going to spend too much time on the next slide. If we just skip to Rishi, if that's okay. As I say, the big focus is around that delivering the health service and using the scale now of strategic commissioning in a way that kind of defines the outcomes and puts guardrails around enabling providers to collaborate more closely together to achieve those outcomes. So the ICB moving forward would be less involved in the design, the day-to-day design, week-to-week design of health services. That would be for providers to step into and increasingly work at scale themselves through a variety of new contracts, which I'll come on to talk about in the next item around neighbourhood health. So this is a bit of an enabler alongside that neighbourhood health paper of trying to make that shift that we've all been talking about for probably about 20 years of trying to move to prevention, trying to deliver care closer to home for people, and then trying to take the benefits of digital capability. And we're not bad in that area, just we've got good examples and great examples within Somerset. It's about how we start to apply that consistently and then start to apply some pace to that shift, those three shifts as well. So move on to the next slide. There's a bit of clearly there's a big organisational change involved in this. I'll come on to talk about the kind of the high level design of the new organisation in a second, but there's a capability to grow and moving from where we are now to what I've just explained. And that particularly around kind of ensuring we've got the right people and the right capabilities as well moving forward. So there's a bit of an internal focus, and I know council colleagues will be familiar with this in terms of your own changes over the last couple of years. There is a kind of a need to look inwards over the next few months and right size the organisation. The impact within Somerset itself will be moving, across the cluster will be moving from about 1,100 posts to 500 posts. So it's a 50% reduction in operating costs that are built into this new way of working. And clearly that's an upsetting time for people. It creates uncertainty, and it also, it takes a job in itself to work our way through. So that consultation with colleagues has launched about 3 weeks ago. And that will conclude. It's a 45-day consultation. We expect that to be sort of largely concluded by July, although there might be a bit of an extension to that, but largely concluded by July. That would enable us then to be sort of in the new organisation form, if you like, from September onwards. So that's the focus at the minute. It's not just about, I guess, right-sizing the posts. It's about growing capabilities in a number of areas that we don't have. And if we continue to have the same posts and the same focus, then we'll continue to get what we've always got. Do you want to take questions now? That'd be...
Yeah, just on that slide where you say at the end, build our capabilities to become an outstanding strategic commissioner. I really hate that kind of language because outstanding could be bad, outstandingly bad. I think it should say, highly effective. And what you mean is really effective. But do you mean outstanding ahead of the rest of the field? Because we all learn from each other all the time. I just think that's designed to fail, that kind of language. I'm sorry to say, I just noticed it just sprung out at me. I would say highly effective instead of that. That's what you mean, isn't it? You want to be really good at it, not necessarily the leader of the field in the entire country. Sorry, it's a small point, but
Yeah.
Having had that as an Ofsted outcome through my career, I've apparently worked in many outstanding schools. If that's the interpretation of it.
No, I take the point, and you're quite right. It's about being highly effective at what we do. The greater focus for us is on within the cluster being good at what we do, and not necessarily kind of climbing to be the best in the country at this point in time. We may have to develop that ambition moving forward. But no, I accept the challenge. Thank you. So that is just really to note the need to revise and to build over the next 6 months, and then there's a national development programme for strategic commissioning, and that will be available. There's products within health that are available kind of nationally and regionally. So it'll take some time, although you've got the reorganisation element of this. Building that capability will take the next few years, and I'll come on to talk about the areas in which we kind of want to grow that capability in a second. So the next slide starts to get into the operating model, and in terms of that sort of change. I wasn't going to go into that in detail today. It's just to kind of note the overall envelope for running the organisation, to give people an idea of the size and scale. So despite the cut, it's still a £50 million organisation itself as a commissioner, and in order to continue to do what it does do over a bigger footprint, and with a 50% reduction in operating costs, then the broad shape of the new organisation is to have a sort of bigger kind of central core to it, and then a smaller place-based team arrangement, which I will touch on now. So move on to the next slide. And I guess that sort of teases that out a little bit more in terms of there'll be a small number of delivery-based functions within it at a place level, and then the core of the organisation then would be able to develop that capability of a sort of population insight and understanding, setting our strategy, if you like, from a health point of view, based on that insight and the public engagement aspect to it, and then also then feeding that into our commissioning intentions and our contracting capability. Now the health service has got a mixed reputation, I think it's fair to say, in terms of that commissioning effectiveness. Come back to your point, and the idea is to get good at all the things I've just touched on there, and to grow our capability in many of those areas, particularly around the data side of things. And we've spoken at this board for some time, and harnessing our data capability, and the work that we've done will place us in a good stead for that, but we need to push on with that at pace. So the next slide is a bit more detail on kind of what that new commissioning organisation looks like. And if people can see that, it gives an idea then, that bottom box is that core part of the organisation that will be more corporate, if you like, and focus on the cluster. And then the top half of the top part of the slide then is around those 6 places which mirror the council boundaries. So there will be a small place-based team, and they will focus on trying to translate that sort of commissioning approach and into those organisations, and trying to, I guess, be the face of the ICB at place level, and also feedback into the cluster what the developments of place look like and the feedback from stakeholders looks like. And then I wasn't going to go through the full capabilities, but you can read through yourself in terms of the functions that we still need to deliver on the left-hand side, and then the the kind of capability that we need to develop in the blue boxes in the centre. And it is on those areas, I've already touched on them, but it is that sort of, that's not just on the data side of things and the sort of strict sense of the data, but it is around developing good population insight and public engagement aspects to it. And that knits locally. Then we had a workshop here on Friday around the sort of the future of the council in terms of that public engagement. And we're already sort of starting to discuss the fact that we don't want to have different strands of public engagement like we do at the minute in many ways. And is there an opportunity as we do this and the council looks to refine and develop its public engagement approach? Is there a way of knitting that together? So we're having kind of a single conversation with the public and building up a common view between us that informs our collective commissioning approach to sections of the population. So that's just as I've said, a bit of detail on that slide, which gives you a bit of a sense of what's happening within the organisation and where. And I think the next slide then focuses in on just a sort of graphical representation of that central core to the organisation and then also the place-based teams. I just wanted to touch on that sort of the bottom right-hand section, if you like, in terms of the place-based teams. So that will focus on, and we'll talk about this in a second, the development of neighbourhood and making the links across with council colleagues, VCFSE colleagues, on what neighbourhood will look like in the future, our vision around that and how we then take the steps to get there. As I touched on previously, there's quite a lot within primary care commissioning, pharmacy, optometry and dentistry, as well as general practice. So there'll be a focus within that place team around the commissioning of those services, as well as then being the point people for local relationships and place-based partnerships. There is a lot within, and I'll touch on this in the neighbourhood section. There's a new suite of contract forms that are available nationally, made available in the last couple of weeks. And I guess we need to collectively take a view as to kind of which of those contract forms enable us to do what is the right thing here in Somerset. So that certainly one big sort of emphasis within that is around place-based partnerships. So providers, no matter what their size and scale, working more closely with other providers in order to meet those outcomes that the commissioners would be setting out and agreeing with them. So that kind of, there's a role really certainly within the ICB place-based team around enabling those partnerships to come together. We can talk about more about that in the next item. So the kind of that's the kind of the heart of it. The next slide really is just the kind of a bit of a thumbnail sketch of the people. So you should recognise some people from the Somerset ICB have moved into the cluster team, so it's just a familiarity there, and then just a little bit at the end really about the kind of the detail around the enablers, key enablers around digital and governance, etc., which I was just there for reference. So in many ways, as I say, there is the attention and focus will be on the headlines usually centres on the 50% reduction in operating costs. I think it's my key message today really. It's not about that reduction at all. It's about the pivot into a different way of working completely, with a focus on those capabilities that I've touched on. A kind of reality check that whilst we'd love those to be there from get-go, it's going to take a while to develop that capability. And it's not just about then working at scale, it's about those connections at a local level, particularly in light of some of the new contract forms and the new kind of organisational forms that some of our providers will take over the next few years as well as they grow their capabilities in population health also. And rightly so. So that was kind of, I'm very happy to take observations or questions as we go.
Let's go for Rima first. Thank you, Rima.
Thank you. Can I ask you a couple of questions, please? The first is that of the three former ICBs, Somerset was the one that balanced its books. Can you reassure the people of Somerset that we're not going to have funds taken away from us to balance out the other two struggling ICBs? Second question is, although you talk about some of these functions being new, they're not new, they were supposed to be developed. The thing that's jumping off the page for me that's new is the fact that you're talking NHS, and apart from the very last bit about place, and actually the whole raison d'etre of the systems was actually to orchestrate working across from the NHS with local services, whether be it council, social services, VCSE, because we can't achieve the three shifts that you put up earlier as an NHS by itself. Sure. And that's missing for me, both here and in a later paper. It feels very NHS rather than population health centric. So just trying to understand how you're going to shift in that direction.
Yeah, so maybe I'll take your second question first. So yeah, in terms of the this we've provided in terms of this is obviously an NHS slide deck in terms of the organisation itself. There's a sort of enormous matrix way of working that we need to adopt moving forward, which brings itself into place. And certainly the neighbourhood health guidance in some ways is a kind of broad cross-governmental approach and paper. It still feels quite NHS in terms of the metrics and the focus that it's got. We're having that conversation locally as to about so the focus on frailty, preventing admissions to hospital is in that paper. It takes us into a place that we're currently in rather than a place that we want to get to in terms of focusing in on that population. So I guess there's something about kind of what's in the papers at the minute, but then also that doesn't quite dovetail with the way of working that we're established already in Somerset. It feels working closely with the sector, working closely with the council and across health. And there's something then about kind of those neighbourhood health plans that produces a bit of a moment for us to say, listen, we've got an opportunity to produce these plans, but how do we do it in a way that isn't health focused? Now, so the requirement has come from health to produce them. I think Ewan's got a view on how effective and helpful it is that they're called neighbourhood health plans. We can get into that. But there's a commitment locally that kind of we do the right thing for the population of Somerset, irrespective of the organisation at which we're necessarily batting for, as it were. But that's quite a challenge, as you know, Rima, in terms of moving from where we are now to where we need to get to. But just to reassure you, that commitment is there. It might not find itself into the flavour of the papers at the moment, but it's certainly in the nature of the conversations that we're having. It feels like when I check with other areas, it feels like we're further advanced on the collective and the partnership aspects of it. Some other areas are running on ahead, but have only got health around the table. Some areas have got the VCFSE sector. Very few have got the council fully engaged and sort of behind the direction of travel like we do. It's about then how, as I'll say in a second, about how we pick the pace up on some of that, rather than the kind of the mindset and the spirit in which it's developed. So that's kind of and welcome to have that conversation. The first question around finances, I can't sit here and give a reassurance today that every pound for Somerset will be spent in Somerset. That's a risk that we will continue to have to manage moving forward, because the responsibility of the new organisation will be at a cluster level. Now, clearly, we're all cited on that as a kind of potential risk. It might be an opportunity if those other areas do address some of the financial imbalances that they have, and clearly a lot of work at the minute within the cluster is addressing the financial challenges in Dorset and in BSW. So it is. There's no doubt it's an open risk that we will need to manage moving forward if we're now part of a bigger financial envelope. Some of that will be there'll be benefit to that, but also then, as you say, there's potential risk in that as well.
Thank you. Duncan, next, please.
I was just curious how this is going to work with this board in that sense. So, the slide talked about place-based arrangements effectively, and obviously there'll be a place-based team from the ICB. But this board's been described in other settings as a place board for Somerset as well. And we talked a while ago about looking at this board and its setup, etc. So how are we going to get this board involved in the commissioning intent, the commissioning arrangements, etc., and influencing some of that thinking as it develops?
Yeah, so you're quite right. The emerging, and there's no kind of definitive plan for that just yet. The emerging conversation really is around if we're keen from a health point of view over time to devolve some commissioning responsibilities into a place, then they will need a forum in which to do that. So there's a question about, and certainly in other areas that don't have an integrated ICP and health and wellbeing board, there's a discussion about then another group being established to do that and the links between it. So there's a piece of work over the next couple of months to determine and work through if there's a place-based partnership and there's a board around that, what's the relation of that board to this board in terms of setting the strategy and the overall direction of travel. So that kind of, you're absolutely right, that we kind of need to make sure we're clear on the links between that commissioning group, if you like, and then how this group continue to hold the ring on the statutory functions that it has.
Thanks. Thank you. Great questions and great answers. A good discussion. Couple of things just for me. I was just interested in whether in all of and it is turmoil, having gone through it ourselves, the turmoil of the bringing all of your colleagues together into a small organisation. I was wondering, So assurance that things like focus on safeguarding, which is on slide 10, is mentioned as one of the statutory responsibilities of the ICB, that there's going to be no diminution, if you like, of resource and focus on safeguarding, both during the change, but then also in the new kind of regime, as it were. Then another question I had was about understanding, and I think I might be conflating NHS trust joint commissioning, but I'm just wondering what the place is for joint commissioning as well in the new ICB, and whether this is going to enable that or again make it harder. And then a risk was in the answer from Rima around, you know, what's your risk register saying about what might be happening in the next few months, for how long it takes to get this, you know, what are you most worried about falling over or being missed during this change? Because we're concerned, those of us who have CQC or Ofsted kind of inspections that loom, that the wider partnership is really important, and it is in day to day it's important too. So I just wondered how you were assessing the risk of that in any mitigations.
Okay, thanks, Heather. In terms of safeguarding, certainly each area of the new organisation has had to make some element of reduction, but certainly the focus at one point, safeguarding was sort of outside of ICB responsibilities moving forward, alongside CHC and communications, and then it's been moved back in. So just to acknowledge that shift. There is focus. Sheila has continued to oversee and continue to kind of run that safeguarding function, and she set out the kind of the target structure and team that she feels that she needs in order to deliver on that. So kind of that work is in flight and part of the kind of the wider piece, but we totally accept and get this criticality, if you like. Joint commissioning, I think there's a view that we could be doing more and more effective at joint commissioning across the cluster when you look at the range of relationships that each of the kind of health teams has with their respective councils. And it's a big focus within the new model, within the core element of the team, to sort of make better use of the Better Care Fund and some of the joint budget arrangements that we've got, and then start to build a bit of a vision, a bit of a plan with each of the council areas as to what that future of joint commissioning looks like. So each place doesn't have to look exactly the same. It's got to have some elements and degrees of commonality, but the level of relationships with the councils in each of the areas varies hugely, and we're mindful of that. So therefore, there's still plenty of opportunity at a local level to start to say, okay, well, listen, what would work for the best interest of us locally? So that's kind of the joint commissioning bit. In terms of risks, that's a great question, and I probably need to go back and look at the risk log to see what's officially logged there. I think there's a mindfulness about having to kind of reset the organisation and get that right. There's a mindfulness then about the need to pick up the pace and have pace on the neighbourhood shift as well, as a way of being able to shift demand, and with that improve outcomes for people. But with those improved outcomes, you know, you generally get then a kind of a greater focus on being able to use your resources more effectively, and we've touched on some of the financial challenges across the piece. So it's about the plate spinning probably in all those areas at the same time, and about then sort of having a clear plan for this kind of reorganisation element of it, but then also through the place-based teams making sure that we're sighted and wary of the risks that come up from providers, and that we can respond to those and have the bandwidth to help providers with those. And it always boils down to the kind of quality risks that we carry, and making sure that we've got the attention and focus on that would be kind of my instinct.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks, David. And sitting here this morning in our Health and Wellbeing Board has made me think about this presentation, which I've seen a few times differently, and it's made me think that actually we will need to use our Health and Wellbeing Board, our Somerset Board, differently, particularly if we want to get value from the strategic commissioning and the looking at outcomes. So I was just thinking, actually, when we looked at our work programme, we've been very backward looking. That's our strategy, and that's actually maybe what we need to build in is some time as a Somerset Board to look at our population health outcomes and actually work. We've all said we want to work with the NHS. We want to, you know, make sure we're getting the best offer for our population. So maybe we need to build in one of those sessions to look at population health outcomes. You know, I remain really concerned about people with severe and enduring mental illness. They're dying prematurely and they're not taking their own lives. They're dying of smoking related diseases. So actually, it's things like that. We all see the system differently. And I think the great bringing everyone together and getting police, getting probation to say, actually, this is what we're seeing, and use that session to inform the strategic commissioning. If the NHS is open to that, I get you've got a lot going on.
Yeah, so it's I've described the kind of I guess a capability within a cluster organisation of looking at data and understanding what outcomes could be commissioned. The bit that we need to kind of operationalise is the relationship then between that piece of work and the work of this board to ensure that kind of is a bringing together, because we should be looking at the same data, but it's the kind of, it's not just the data aspect, it's the context of that, as you've said. So there is, I think, to be really clear as a board what outcomes are important across the various agencies, and to have that over the next sort of few months would be very, very useful and valuable.
And I'll just come back, Bill. If you only look at the data at cluster, you're only looking at NHS data, you're only looking at NHS outcomes. We know that the contribution to health and wellbeing, about 50% of it is nothing to do with the NHS.
Yeah.
So we've got to look more holistically than just NHS.
Yeah, no, I guess that's what I'm saying. It's been able to
Okay,
bring
well,
that
I
as a sort of
misunderstood.
rounded picture on it. So I take your point as a risk. It goes into a very health focus with this, and therefore that's why the kind of the work of this board and indeed the other boards is critical in being able to make sure we've got a rounded picture, not just in terms of the completeness of the data, but the context in which and the experience of those leading services and what's needed for the population and what the priorities are. So I would agree entirely.
Okay, thank you. Angela, I think, I guess it is your hand. That's good.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. David, the one thing I haven't found in the documents is whether expert by experience influence into commissioning plans would sit place-based or strategic or both. And I wondered whether there's been any discussion about that.
There's a strong engagement arm to it within the cluster team. So at the minute there's more of an emphasis within the kind of that at a cluster level. I guess the bit in terms of the detail around the operating model is how does that play out within place? And so we haven't kind of managed to articulate that yet, but I'm happy to take that back and link with the outside around it. Thank you.
Picking up a few of those threads, I just wondered, picking up Alison's point particularly about commissioning intentions and what we all know, I think that feeds back into the redesign of this board as well. Because I think, we've been very clear we want to get better granular information at a neighbourhood level, picking up what GPs know, joining up all the data sources that we got. And I think, we need to think about who's in the room with us if we start to move down that route of how we work on the commissioning intentions, obviously up to the cluster and the place team about how they want to do that and the pace, etc. But I think that all brings everything together. And Alison's point about being backward looking, I do recognise. I think some of the things that we were talking about in the workshop on Friday, very much about actually what we want to do, what we're going to do, probably worthwhile to actually bring those things out a bit more as well, and then sit that alongside the conversation about the refresh strategy over the next year or so. So we got an idea about how we're deploying our resources, how we intend to work, and then actually refocusing rather this board to say, so what does that mean we want to change about the place, rather than reacting to what's happening after the event.
If I can add to that, we had quite a big discussion about this at the ICB board last week, and I think there's a great respect for the Somerset board. And there has been ambition to find a way to work with it, but you're right, it needs to change its nature in the process if it's to have the power to be able to help it work effectively, because at the moment, technically the ICP is a statutory committee, it's not a powerful body, and the Health and Wellbeing Board has its own independent statutory responsibilities. So there is a piece of work to be done to follow this through effectively. The context for that is then very much the neighbourhood work, the question of IHOs or advanced FTs and so on, the way in which some of that will work, all of which is easily written down on the paper by the Secretary of State and hard to turn into reality. But that's where we are. And I suppose I would just like to emphasise that what I've witnessed is a willingness to listen, talk and develop together something which can work effectively. And the worst thing that we can have is duplications and have one committee here, one committee there, one committee there, all doing the same thing. So we may all need to be together in that. So I think there is a need for a workshop. And I'm sure that that's something which will happen in each place. Our advantage is this place is talking to itself already, which is a helpful start. There are places within the cluster which are not. So let's grab the opportunity.
Okay, not seeing any. Oh, I was about to say I'm not seeing anybody else, and there pops up Gerald's hand. Hello, Gerald.
Hi there. If I've missed this point, I apologise, but a question I have, and I've raised before, is it comes to the ICB's commitment to the local resilience forums. As I understand it, ICBs are remaining as Cat 1 responders. With this cluster formation, are you going to be able to resource the LRFs that you currently cover and also continue to commit funding to the LRF secretariats as well?
You might have got me there, Gerald, to be honest. Certainly we're still Cat 1 responder, yes, and we're still committed to that. In terms of, I'm not cited on the level of funding, Gerald, I need to go away and have a look at that, but that's something that we need to check on, but certainly that responsibility that we've got at the moment continues moving forward. We've got internal considerations about how you then fulfill that function, if you like, across the footprint that we've got, and how you do that with the sort of the size of the team that we have. But that's kind of for us to kind of work through. But that the requirements and obligations that we've got doesn't change.
Okay, so my concern is based on, we work very effectively with colleagues from organisations such as SWAST, and we know how they struggle to cover the 5 LRFs that they have within their footprint. And I just have a concern that we would see an erosion of that commitment if we're not careful. So I wish you good luck in terms of making sure that you continue to support that. And as we saw with the flooding recently in Somerset, how important those structures are for supporting the communities in Somerset.
Yeah, and I'm happy to pick the conversation up outside as well, Jared, around that.
Okay, thank you.
Hey. You look like you were about to contribute.
Maybe in the next section.
Oh, there we go. It's good to have a wake and shake session, as we know from Alison. Anybody else got any comments or questions or concerns or reasons to be cheerful? Oh, sorry. I wonder which of them is going to be.
Yeah, no, we've got reasons to be cheerful. We're working very hard, as you know, in Somerset with our prevention work, and that is really what you're talking about too. And I know we're working together on it, but the data sharing and everything we can do to stop people going into hospital, falling at home, all those things, I just feel we can really do a lot with our population and informing the population as well, so that they don't always expect to turn up at hospital if something happens. We can look after them at home, they can be looked after in the care home. There's so much there. I worry about the population expecting to be made well, and I know that's obviously you live with that all the time, which we can't do, and we can't do that we can't lift people up and make them better even if they fall over at home, or we think that they're better off staying at home and their relatives don't. We have all those problems to deal with all the time, but the prevention thing is helping us to work better with our population. I am absolutely convinced it's going to make a massive difference.
Yeah.
That was a good note to end on, wasn't it?
I was going to say, let's just leave it there. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for that presentation and for fielding the questions. I'm aware that there are some to which there are answers, some to which there are answers in development, and some to which there are things we have yet to learn. But I think the point about where this board fits in the new jigsaw, and I also think it's going to be quite interesting how we I wouldn't want to see a cookie cutter model of this is how it's done in other areas, but also I think there's learning that could be taken from what we've done here in Somerset, but also learning that we can take from other places, I'm sure, in order to move this forwards. And we know from our collaboration with other local authorities in the Wessex Partnership, there are some interesting lessons to learn from each other. And as this agenda develops in its idiosyncratic ways over the coming years, it will be really interesting to follow. Okay, thank you very much. Right, so we're moving on to integrated neighbourhood working update, and I've got a significant selection of people down to present: Ruth, Catherine, Peter, Duncan, and David. And I'm not sure who to go to first. David, it looks like you.
Yep, I'll sort of set the scene, as it were, and I'll hand over to Peter and Duncan. Catherine isn't here today, and Ruth might be online and might join in. So yes, first, sort of Rima's pulled the rug from under me in terms of the nature of this presentation, and so it does look and feel like an NHS presentation because the sort of the symbol there on the right hand side. So our team did pull it together on behalf of the partnership, which is why it kind of looks and feels more health dominated than it is, and I feel it does belie the kind of the work that's going outside, work's going on, I should say, in order to sort of pull together a common view of what we want neighbourhood working to achieve for the local population. So kind of in terms of areas of progress, we've touched on the sort of the data side of things previously at this group, and that sort of that data platform work is well underway and due to start. There's a test case of the data running at the minute. It's due to produce data from July onwards, which will be a big step forward. We don't want to talk about governance too much, but it's about kind of ways of communicating and building that consensus. I think it's probably a better way to describe it. So we've got a sort of series of touch points now in a regular cadence, which is helping develop a common understanding of what we want to achieve. On a practical level, we've agreed to build out the neighbourhoods from a PCN footprint. It's not the PCN teams or primary care network teams, but the footprint that are there. That's geographies of about 50,000, and that is kind of, and we're in a kind of in a terminology where that within health is a neighbourhood, but it means very different things to partners around the table, and it may mean different things to the public. And we're kind of rolling with that at the minute in terms of that needing to be kind of classified as a neighbourhood from a health point of view, and so I appreciate everybody's understanding about that. There's something about how we describe it, but that is the neighbourhood health kind of definition, if you like, within health that partners are kind of supporting it at this point. And we've talked already about the kind of that move towards outcomes. So kind of that focus really has been around establishing kind of a vision, principles of how we're going to work, the fact we're going to build those neighbourhood teams, and also the fact that in many parts of Somerset that sort of neighbourhood working has already taken place at the minute, whether it be within health and proactive care, whether it's within council services, particularly Connect Somerset, or whether it's within the BCFSE sector across every neighbourhood, genuine neighbourhood that there is in the county. So that is the kind of a bit of a thumbnail sketch of where things are at the moment. If we move on to the next slide, please. Within, and the next slide after this gives a bit of detail on there's a national framework within health that's been published 2 weeks ago, that gives, as it describes, a bit of a kind of view of what the key ingredients and components of a neighbourhood way of working looks like. And although it has been produced, and I've made this point already, sort of multi-agency at government level, it still feels in its parts quite focused on health in many ways. And there's undeniably a big focus within the health aspect of trying to support people and improve their outcomes, improve their experience, but also reduce their use of health services in other areas, so you can free up resource in order to be kind of deployed elsewhere. So that remains true within this iteration of the framework. But it does provide an opportunity for us to focus in on certain cohorts of the population. Now we've done some work in Somerset around a frailty strategy, so kind of how we best support people at risk of developing frailty, so the prevention aspect to it, what that series of support looks like as they progress through the condition, and how we kind of mobilise teams and teams of teams to support them on that journey. That kind of frailty is something that's kind of slightly controversial, I have to say. It's got clear connotations and clarity within health, but it's not an assets-based approach to it that you would probably get more so within the VCFSE sector. So we're currently working through how we translate that frailty approach and how you translate that for the public and for the wider sector into more of a positive description in many ways. And I guess it's a bit of a test case of how we will need to work moving forward, how we want to work moving forward, and being able to identify what each agency kind of can contribute towards that neighbourhood working, and then also how we bring those things together. So kind of the next steps for us is around we've got some funding around integrated neighbourhood working leadership. So the thought and design is going into the minute around how do you sort of identify someone that can convene that neighbourhood as an individual, single individual. Is it a couple of people, one to focus on the clinical aspect, one on the broader engagement aspect, and that's the debate at the moment. And we've struggled for funding in this space for quite some time now, but there is an availability of some funding within health for the forthcoming year to enable those teams to be stood up and to use that frailty as a test case. So move on to the next slide. That covers off that neighbourhood health framework and some of the kind of just the headlines around it. I wasn't going to go through that in detail, but it does start to, as I say, it offers up the opportunity of new contract models within health. So we certainly from a health point of view can commission at a neighbourhood level, and then we've also got the emergence of integrated health organisations that could take on the responsibility for an entire population. And there's a bit of clarity and detail in the framework around how those contracts potentially knit together, which has been lacking until now. So that's kind of those, and I'd say the three sort of reform agendas that are embedded within it around sort of improving that routine healthcare with a focus on access to general practice, which will be no surprise. Around proactive care, and again, we've got a good starting position within the county on that proactive care models. There's something about how they kind of build a bit of commonality in the outcomes that they're delivering because they've evolved quite differently in each of the areas that we've got. And then there's also a focus on kind of urgent care and the flow continued in terms of people through intermediate care and through the virtual wards and making better use of that technology. So that's kind of the framework. As I said, dovetails with the piece we've already spoken about in terms of the shifting responsibilities with strategic commissioning. So we're trying to encourage and enable teams to come together right across the county at a neighbourhood level and to do the right thing for the individuals and the cohorts and the population that they're looking after. There's a whole lot of stuff that gets in the way of that now in terms of the contractual arrangements, the incentives and the funding models. And there's a bit of an opportunity in order to be able to take a step back and to try and align those as much as we can. That enables teams to be able to do the right thing for the individual, but at a planning sense, be able to put more of a focus on population and less of a focus on elective and urgent care and more the traditional segments of commissioning activity that we've got. And the neighbourhoods, I guess, agenda is the stimulus to think differently in that way I've just described, alongside some of the other changes we spoke about in the last item. So that's kind of, I'll pause there because the last slide gives a bit of a précis of kind of the immediate priorities and what is the kind of focus moving forward. But there's been a big drive to ensure we are, I guess, pretty clear and transparent about what each of the agencies and organisations can do in the neighbourhood space and how the different agendas that we've got through local government and through health come together, and about translating that into a kind of a programme of work in which we can just start taking steps on along the way. And it's no doubt the sort of the terminology, phrasing of it is quite different in the various sectors that we've got, but that's the conversations that we're having as to how you kind of build that common view. So I'll pause there. I don't know, Peter, if you wanted to kind of add anything to that.
I don't want to add much, David. Actually, I just think it's just worth just mentioning this point about how it feels a bit like health, particularly in terms of the slides. So I think there's two things here. I think from a health perspective, there's quite a lot we need to change, and particularly change in focus and mindset around population health and how do we focus on populations and not on delivery in the sense that it's all about acute hospitals. Essentially, is where the NHS centres itself otherwise. So I think there is something for health to do to really get that focus right. And therefore that can lead to a feeling a lot of this is about health, but fundamentally we've got to get that shift right into the population and how we work with partners at neighbourhood level. And Alison's point earlier, I think that this board can be really helpful in that, in really thinking about the Somerset population and the Somerset population across those neighbourhoods. And I know the language is an issue. And what are the outcomes we really should be focusing on? What is it that are the issues we really need to focus on for the people of Somerset in the different parts of Somerset? So that's very much what this needs to be about. But we've also got to recognise, I think, that health need to sorts itself out as well in terms of how it does that.
Yeah, if I can just add, I think I don't have the concern particularly this feels like a health conversation, because actually as a council we care about the health of the population of Somerset. So I'm really happy the council gets stuck into this conversation on this basis as well. But it's absolutely Peter's point. This is going to be about delivering health in a different way. And I think actually, as much as I was worried about the paper coming out about neighbourhood health and so on, I don't think it's unhelpful in some of the things it's advancing. Very much it ties into what we were saying earlier about the role of this board going forward, etc. Very much it ties in, I think, to how the council designs its services. But the critical thing for me is that this is seen by all of us about our collective approach to improving prevention. So when we talk about all the shifts, they're about prevention. It's about stopping people getting into service demand. It's about stronger communities. And I think we're having the right conversation. It feels to me we've got lots of bits of this jigsaw being formed right now. And I don't want to stop any of that. I've been one of the people saying, no, look, let's not try and get something perfect for everything and then take years to do that. Let's just get some things going. But at some point, I think we as a group need to see proposals from people like me and other organisations in the room that says, okay, so these are some of the big picture things that we are going to change now, and we have that basis to move forward from. Because if we're not careful, we're going to design lots of different approaches on the current infrastructure of organisations, the current way we work, the current way we're laid out. If we're intending to change things to make it easier, we need to start talking about that as well. And then we can build how we are going to put the future together on the basis of what the future is going to look like, rather than what it looks like now, and then try and make it all fit together after the event.
Hi, thank you, and thanks to the paper again. And I'm very heartened. Sorry. Thank you. I'm very heartened by the fact that we're kind of acknowledging the bits that we each as individual partners need to do. So what Peter's saying about wanting to get their own kind of act together first and do things in different ways, perfect. And I'm really pleased that frailty has been picked up as it's a word that is, I think we're beginning to be very self-aware, and I think that's really good. And it doesn't have to be perfect first time. So I'm pleased with that. As long as we keep thinking that and checking what we're saying when we take these things outside, I think it's important. I was just going to say there's a couple of some specific things. One is there is a bit of an issue, and I can see why health thinks of neighbourhoods 50,000 people, but of course lots of us will think of neighbourhoods and gangs of people in different sizes. And I remember being in that workshop where we had Naomi Eisenhardt, and I asked the same question there. She was making very clear as a great kind of social engineer that 50,000 is kind of too big from a community sense, but then we just need to make sure that we drop that size down and deliver in smaller areas, which is what you're going to be doing within the PCN. So I think, again, I think we're all aware of what could be a real trip hazard, I think, really, which is about what a neighbourhood is. But my specific questions were around, there's a mention of the data platform, a linked data platform, which I wondered if that was just an internal NHS ICB type of linked platform. I know, poor Peter's. We've been talking for years about the challenge of IT systems across the NHS and everywhere else. But I just wondered if that was one just about aligning your own NHS systems. And of course, because I'm really concerned, obviously, and proud of the work we've done collectively on things like Transform, Family View, where we're sharing the sort of metadata from our various data points. I think that's one specific question. And the other one also is, quite rightly, you need to focus on what you're trying to get done, because you can't do everything everywhere all at once. But of course, and we're always grateful to be able to work in that fully multi-agency way, because we've got, say, in the adult side of things, the council side of things, we've got Best Start in Life, Family First hubs and partnerships that we're kind of, working towards and doing. And then, but of course, out in the wider partnerships, we've got DWP, I guess, or whoever's doing employment hubs. There's a lot of activity that works, and it's just that it's bearing in mind that at the right time we do stitch that together. So sorry, a couple of specific things. Oh, and then just, I think not for now, but for another time, is urgent care. I get a little bit kind of confused, I suppose, partly if I conflate, I think it's from the other, might be from the other slide, a small amount of money that we're spending in a sense on primary care against everything else, and then some of the stuff that happened through COVID and other places where I think people were relying on urgent care rather than. There's something about understanding the landscape for how urgent care is delivered and who isn't, and a kind of like a blue lights partner, how we do that. But that might be something for us to talk about another time, because then it's quite a big issue.
So actually my question follows on from Heather's, which is the NHS does want to focus a lot on frailty because that's where 80% of NHS resource goes. But we did have that workshop before Christmas on early years development in children. And although there is CYP thrown in amongst a whole load of diseases, actually that's quite an important cohort. So if we wanted, so how prescriptive is this? Because actually I think that we're still working on early years development in children. It's not in here. How prescriptive or how much of a block is what's on here? Would it be an obstacle for those who are working on it, or is it this is a suggestion, but you can add more stuff to the list?
You want me to go? Yeah, yeah, if I do that and pick up the hubs and urgent care and CYP. So the data is intended to sort of almost replicate the transform, except for all age groups. And that's been the focus, certainly in the work that we started within Somerset. There's a bit of a kind of a review of that approach as we go into the cluster, because clearly there'll be a need for data, not just at Somerset level now, but at the cluster level. So we're just keeping, I guess, an overview, a watching brief that the scope of the data that's needed find its way into that, and it doesn't get then too complicated in pulling data from a wide variety of sources. So I kind of, I accept your point there, Heather, absolutely, that we need to do the right thing, if you like. It's going to make a difference for the teams and provide the insight that's needed. It's just has to be, there's a bit of a risk as we transition to the cluster that it becomes narrower in its focus, and therefore probably, in my opinion, less helpful in terms of generating insight. In terms of the family hubs, I think the approach is to kind of to simplify what we've got, but not to lose it. And the difficulty once we get into that and how you actually go about doing that, but how do you connect up? We've got a variety of hubs for various groups of the population and for various teams at the moment. And what's the best way then of kind of connecting those hubs, as it were, rather than necessarily and reviewing them for those that perhaps aren't working for people. But yeah, there's a kind of, I don't want to speak for everybody, but certainly from a health perspective, there's a desire to build on what's good, really, and be honest about that, and have a way of working that's critical of what we've got, and a critique of what we've got, but try and build on the kind of what's effective, but make it simpler for people to access care, make it simpler for people to access support, and make it simpler for people to work in these services and teams that we've got. Did you want to pick up the others?
Yeah, and so two things, Heather. So I think, first of all, that point about stitching stuff together, I think we just need to bear in mind what Duncan said. If we try and stitch it together now before we do anything, we won't do anything because it's too difficult and complicated. So I think we've got to be wary about not trying to make it perfect before we start. So we've got to do some stuff and have our minds on the fact we've got to try and stitch some of this together, and it might not be as good as it might be initially, but we need to try and get there. Otherwise, we don't change anything. So I think that's really important. With regard to the CYP, from an NHS point of view, this framework, there's a concern, I guess, in the NHS, in parts of the NHS nationally, that a shift to neighbourhood working won't deliver benefits in terms of acute demand, basically. So there's a real concern that, because the theory goes, if more prevention, more local working, supporting people earlier, less acute demand. We've got to, there's a real concern we don't deliver on that, and it doesn't work. So that's why this neighbourhood framework is very specific about some things that for us to focus on, because there's a deal going on. If we're going to put money there, we need to spend less over here, and that's got to happen. So I don't think that precludes us focusing on other things, but we have to focus on those things as well. So I think that comes back to how do we manage the local position, the local context where we put our effort, because we know Somerset best, but also recognising there's some things we've got to deliver in that national agenda as well. That's the thing we're continually doing. And I think it's right that we say these are issues for Somerset, therefore we should focus on.
Yeah, just picking up Peter's point, I think because of where the NHS is and the pressures, I think we have to have a relentless focus on reducing emergency attendances and emergency admissions. And we think that frailty is that population cohort that will deliver that. Now, in my world, my contribution to frailty, I'm not NHS, is getting you all moving and building strength and balance. So we can all play a part, even if we choose a cohort that feels very health centric. So I think I absolutely agree, Peter, it's doing something and getting us to work differently, and then really prioritising populations. And it might be Rima, that not all children and young people are prioritised. We've got the family hubs work going on anyway, but we look at a cohort of children, maybe children with SEND, and make sure we've got their offer right around preventing emergency admissions. But we are going to have to ruthlessly prioritise, and that's not something we are good at, because we try and do everything, and we have to play a bit of a numbers game and go systematically through population cohorts that are driving our emergency admissions, I think, because that will mean we won't be in the difficult place we were in last winter, which we want to avoid again. And hopefully we'll get better flu vaccination rates. We won't have so much flu.
Peter, would you just put the microphone off? I've got you in next.
Okay, thank you. So I've got 2 points. One around the word neighbourhood, because it was mentioned earlier, so it might be worth mentioning. And second, regarding a gap between stage 1 and stage 2. So on neighbourhoods, I'm acutely sensitive to communications and branding, and I'm very happy with the neighbourhood health service because it's got a snappy ring and resonates with the NHS. Very happy with neighbourhood health plans. For a similar reason, we need to guard against any use of neighbourhood plan, which means something completely different to town and parish councils. Operates on a much smaller neighbourhood, as Heather, because it has identified, and is largely discredited owing to the National Planning Policy Framework and 5-year land supplies, to the extent that not just Somerset, many councils, many parishes don't believe it's worth having one. So that's needs to be thinking about how we communicate that. The second, on the gap, in stage 1 is very inward health focused, is the way it reads. Stage 2 has the second point down, confirm governance and operational partnerships. I think we need something in the stage 1 which is plan governance and operational partnerships, because if we're working with partners, we need to be working over the year and joining a load of stuff up. So, for example, we have, there's a memorandum of understanding with the voluntary sector, VCFSE sector. Locally, we set our local community network up on the primary care network with a health focus in the pilot phase, and we have 2 separate groupings. There's one run by the Connect Somerset Champions these days, one running by the primary care network, and we also, many of us in the room, have been working on Somerset Council's community working review. So lots of stuff needs to be joined up in terms of what we're going to be launching in April 2027, particularly in our council world. We're going to have a refreshed Somerset Council coming in May 2027, and every parish will have been refreshed then. So there needs to be some proper thought in terms of what's the takeoff path for stage 2, and that work needs to be done this year.
Thank you. I've never heard of an election be called refreshing before, but I will I will take that and learn from it. Thank you, Ewan. Do you want to pop your microphone off? Did you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, I can. I take the points, Ewan. Absolutely, and we're trying to talk less about the governance because it doesn't, it's not really, it doesn't fit with this agenda in many ways. It's about the decision making and about how accountability lies. But yeah, absolutely, we'll pick up those points in terms of the planning for it. There is, and just in terms of addressing some of the previous points, there's something about, there's an adage that if you want to go alone, go quick, and if you want to go together, go slow. And I guess we're trying our best to bring some of those together and go a little bit quicker than we've got at the minute, but keep everybody on board. So that's kind of the focus around trying to push on with this year. But I take your point around planning for that for the following years.
Thanks. Yeah, and it's one of the challenges we have is to work at pace from various government bodies, and there's a difference between pace and haste, which I do try and push back on, as you want to get things right as well as do things quickly. I've got Heather next.
It was super quick and coming off the back of what Alison was saying, but also it ties in with Ewan and Ewan's comments. I think if you think about all of our contributions to something like frailty and keeping people out of urgent care, one of the big things is how well we can have build community resilience, which I know means all kinds of resilience, but that community around people, that wraparound care through our VCS voluntary sector, lovely partners, and community sector partners, but also just the folks who live there. So I just think that's also an important thing too. I just didn't want to lose that one, because you are right, all of us can touch on that issue and make a difference.
Okay, I think that's everyone on agenda item 7. So thank you so much for the presentation of the contributions there and the update. So we know this is a work in progress, and getting it right is more important than doing it quickly. I think is what we've established as the learning from that. Agenda item 8 is the annual report on health protection, which is from Alison.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. And I don't intend to go through the report in detail. You can all read, but just pull out a few highlights. Rish is just sharing some slides. But what I would say is that health protection is a team game. So absolutely everyone in this room plays part in health protection, whether that is you each individually getting your immunisations. I brought a copy of the schedule because it blew my mind that now I need 2 pages. When I trained, it didn't look like that. But if anyone wants to take a picture, very welcome to. Don't nick it because it's my only copy. So yeah, thank you for all of your contributions. And just picking up Gerald's point earlier, I am quite concerned about the NHS changes and the fact we're going to go to one EPR, emergency planning team, for the cluster. We have Glastonbury Festival, we have Hinkley Point, and one infection prevention control team for the cluster, aside from our lovely colleagues at the hospital. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting year, but what I intend to do is just show you a couple of the highlights of work that we've done this year. Are you having any luck with the slides, Rish? Okay, well, I'll just keep talking. And so for those of you that think, well, what the heck is health protection? No, you definitely don't need to look at that. That's me. So the health protection system basically makes sure we know about the risks to the health of our population, and we act early to mitigate the health effects of those risks on our population, and we improve health outcomes arising from those risks. And we undertake system quality improvement projects to do that. So business as usual are just things like disease outbreaks. I think we had 158 disease outbreaks and incidents over the course of last year. Some of them are very exciting and interesting. Getting notified of a case of brucella is always quite interesting. We have a lot of cases of brucella now, though, related to imported dogs. So the first one you get, you go, oh, I'm a bit worried about that. And then we're not worried anymore. And really challenging outbreaks like scabies, which actually, if you've ever had scabies, is a really hideous illness. And if you imagine looking after a care home of residents with scabies, you can only imagine how uncomfortable that is in a heat wave. So it straddles a whole range of things, and lots of you help us ensure that we respond effectively. So this is business as usual, really. It also oversees all the screening programs, all the immunisation programs, does all the emergency planning functions. And so it's a very diverse portfolio of work that I have the privilege of deciding if I tell you I'm assured that we're in good standing. And I think we are. We did a bit of an audit this year, next slide, against what good looks like. Next one. Thank you. So this is national standards for health protection. And actually the one that we were weakest on was about building community resilience, which I thought was really interesting, actually, because community resilience is absolutely critical to making sure that we respond to floods and respond to any number of emergency planning scenarios that might arise over the coming year. And so we do need to give this some attention. So did an audit. Next slide, please. Our business as usual is always quite interesting, actually, in Somerset, because it straddles Glastonbury Festival, which most people don't have on their patch, Hinkley Point, and air quality. That's what all those cars are. Somerset is lucky, actually, that we have much better air quality than a lot of areas. And our last air quality management zone in Yeovil is likely to be removed in 2026 because of continued compliance. So because you don't see any headlines where things have gone wrong, you can be assured that we're pretty good at this stuff. And every time we bring national visitors to Glastonbury Festival, or to Hinkley Point for that matter, they just say this must never move. Like Glastonbury Festival must never move because everyone knows what they're doing. And SWAST colleagues, you know, we have a really slick operation, don't we, Sarah? And we work as one. Festival, local system, local teams, working together. But I've got a couple of highlights of things that I think we've done really well at this year and a couple of warnings. So if we go to the next slide, we all played in Exercise Pegasus, which was the biggest national multi-agency pandemic preparedness exercise. We got through it and it showed excellent collaborative working, but it did expose some gaps around surge arrangements across social care, IPC, data sharing and mass fatalities planning. So with the global situation looking a little worrying, that is something we need to pay attention to over the course of the year. Next slide. Shout out for colleagues in social care and in healthcare, because if you look at our frontline healthcare workers, this is flu vaccination rates for 25-26. We did surpass the target. We were supposed to get a 5% increase on our rather poor baseline, and we surpassed that. We need to keep doing that. We're good at over 65s, care home residents. There are other populations, particularly school children at risk, under 65 at risk, where we're less good. So more work to do, but I think we're on the right track finally. That's good. And then the last bit of a highlight is HPV vaccination. So HPV vaccination protects women against cervical cancer and boys against anogenital cancers. And actually we have the best vaccination rates in Somerset in the southwest. But I said this to the team and they weren't delighted with me because I said, well, 83% isn't that good. Because they're like, well, we're the best in the southwest. I went, well, we're still missing 15%. So more to do, but we're on the right track. And this just because when people say, oh, we're missing by 15%, we have an offer for children that are not regularly attending school, and we have an offer for children that are electively home educated, and that's provided through our local NHS teams. So I think again, that shows that we join things up, we work together already very well as a system. Last highlight is a bit forward looking. We recognise that our vaccination rates are not as good as they have been historically. We've got pretty good MMR1 and it's improved this year. I think it went from 89 to 92%. If you think Haringey's got about 40% coverage, but they obviously have a massive outbreak of measles, so we, want to keep avoiding that. England has lost its measles-free status, and we are in the middle nationally of a very significant measles outbreak. Somerset has not seen any cases linked to this outbreak currently, but we have to keep our children vaccinated. And what we recognise is more and more parents are telling us that they can't make the appointment at the general practice Tuesday afternoon session. So we're really delighted that we're one of 12 health visitor immunisation pilot projects. And I think ours is the only one that's being provided by a local authority, actually. And we're going to try and reach 400 children that haven't engaged in primary care vaccination offer. And they're going to receive those vaccinations at home with a health visitor. And the GP practices are delighted. There's 6 practices participating in this. And we hope that it's a mixed model that will inform development going forwards. So the last slide is really to say, this is the list of quality improvement projects for 2026. So we want to keep increasing our measles uptake. We want to improve our data quality. Our screening data is not great. And so it doesn't enable us to target populations where we know we've got lower coverage. For those of you in Bridgewater, the breast screening van is in Morrison's car park at the moment, and all the buses have got banners on to remind people to go for breast cancer screening. So we're beginning to get better at data analysis, but we need that breakdown so that we can give messages in that neighbourhood system to remind them when the van's there. It's no good people in Yeovil saying you must go for breast cancer screening now because the van isn't in Yeovil. It's in Bridgewater, so you need to tie it all up. Want to reduce the burden of respiratory infections. That's largely a vaccination strategy. We do need to look at building community resilience to emergency threats. I am very concerned about what's going on in Iran and the Middle East, and I think this year is going to be really challenging going forwards. So let's get ahead of that and build community resilience. And the last thing is focused on pandemic preparedness and embed lessons from exercise Pegasus. So I think the headlines are, you can be assured that we've got a lot going on. Everyone's playing their part. I think we need to mitigate the for the NHS changes and losing our local teams for IPC and EPR. And if we are impacted by those, we need to have honest conversations and make sure that we continue to protect the health of our population. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Always a fascinating report, and we always learn some interesting things about Somerset from it. Are there any questions or comments before we move on to the sequel? Duncan?
Just on a very practical level, is there a bit of a dashboard of vaccine rates across all different vaccines? Because you mentioned a few stats in there. But, I've done work in other places, for example, where we've been working with employers and actually getting them to push vaccine take up. We don't talk about it in lots of other spaces. So I'm just wondering if there's a way we can maybe linking some of the work we're doing around the economic side, because employers do talk to their staff on a regular basis, and actually there is an employment benefit of children not being off school ill and parents having to be at home looking after them, as well as all the medical benefits as well. So it's something we've had good take up for in other places.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide a link to the published vaccination data. It doesn't break down, but yeah, we can do the headlines.
Thank you. I think I was surprised, as you probably were, when community resilience came out as amber, which was kind of surprising. So it'd be quite nice, again, not necessarily for now, but to understand what elements, because when you say community resilience, it's everything from having someone who can look in on Mrs. Miggins around the corner to, you know, what's your let's say flood resilience and what's your emergency planning like. There's all kinds of things that it can be part of. But I just want, if there's more detail of what made us amber, so that we can know how we can feed that into the work that's done elsewhere on community resilience.
Yeah, shall I provide that outside the meeting?
Yeah, please. I think that's going to be an interesting one. I'm particularly interested in the demographic factors that lead to community resilience. I suspect we are outstanding, if I can use that word, in some areas, and I suspect we are not so great in others, because of the demographic factors behind those, and also the experiential factors. Community resilience in moorlands might be slightly different to other areas because of what it's been through, and so on. So I think we just got to be get a more of a deep dive on that. Would be really interesting. Alison.
Yeah, thank you. And for those of you who don't know, we had Professor Whitty visit us on Friday, and we showed him our emergency planning toolkit. So we're beginning to put together grab bags and show communities as the information that, not the information, sorry, the actual resources that they should have to hand in their homes should they have to evacuate because of flooding. And he was very taken by that, actually. So I think there is more to do, and it is multi-layered. It's not, in some areas people are very resilient and very well organised for floods, but maybe not so well organised for just looking after each other and each other's neighbours. So more to do.
Indeed, no, it's a fascinating topic. Okay, so if we're all happy with agenda item 7, we'll move on to the sequel, the annual report on health protection. Alison.
I'm just encouraging my colleague Louise Curry to be slightly less shy and come and sit. But, as is traditional, we're going to stand up because we've been sat down for an hour and a half, and it's not really living the dream, is it, if we sit down for another half an hour whilst I talk to you? Oh, look, yes, Duncan needed that. Oh dear, Paul. I'm not going to make any. Pardon? Doing an Alison, it's official. Right. Okay. Right, you can sit down now, but I would encourage all of you to do a walk at lunchtime. Right. Okay then. Yeah.
I'm pleased to say I took Barney for a good 40-minute walk this morning, so I'm already there.
Already living the dream. Right, next slide. So the Director of Public Health's annual report is one of my statutory duties, and it's part of my advocacy role to shine a light on a health issue that is negatively or positively impacting the health of our local population and advocate for its improvement and protection. Now, I'm conscious that at least half this room has heard this presentation twice. Some of you, this will be the third time. So I'm going to shake it up a little bit, and we're not going to go through quite as much detail as we have previously. But for those of you who haven't heard it, just have a look at the slides, if that's all right. Because what I go through is the evidence base around physical activity. I chose the topic of physical activity because Dame Sally Davis, when she was the Chief Medical Officer, described physical activity and getting moving as the miracle cure, because it prevents illness, but it also helps manage illness, both physical and mental illness, and it makes us all feel better, and it also helps us interact in our communities, and it helps build stronger communities, actually. And if young people get the opportunity to engage in moving more and physical activity, they get a boost to self-esteem, they get a sense of belonging, and they get to know people and make friends, which is none of that is bad for you. And I was staggered when I found out about 25% of our adult population do less than 30 minutes moderate physical activity a week. And moderate physical activity, I could test you all to see if you were listening last week, but I won't, is where you get just a little bit out of breath. So walking briskly, not, so maybe being dragged along by the dog is moderate physical activity. Ambling for a chat with your friends might not count. The national guidance is 150 minutes a week. And so that's why I chose physical activity as this year's topic, because it's something we can all do something about. We can all take action ourselves. You can do chair aerobics. You don't have to be walking. You don't have to join a gym or run a marathon. We can all just break that pattern of being sedentary. And we can do that for ourselves in our workplaces, but we can do that in our communities, and we can do that as an employer as well. So I'm going to skip over Rish. Just quickly, the next slide, why physical activity was chosen. This one, the next one, please, sorry, is what we really want to focus on, and I've got some asks of all of you later, is shifting people that are doing almost nothing to doing something in terms of getting moving. I've changed my terminology. Last week people said, don't talk about physical activity, just talk about getting moving, because it's less threatening. And we need those people that are completely sedentary at the moment to get up to 100 minutes. And why am I saying that? It is because this red line shows the health benefits. And if you shift someone from being pretty much sedentary to even 50 minutes, never mind 100, you'll see huge health benefits. And so that really does need to be our target. And we actually do this as employers. We get people to come and sit at a desk. And actually, we've done some work as a council, and they've told us if their boss doesn't see them as marked red or green on Teams all the time, they're worried their boss doesn't think they're at work. So they just sit at the desk, either in meetings or keep moving the mouse so that you're green, so that your boss knows you're doing something. We're making people sedentary if you're an office-based person. If you're not an office-based person, I guess if you're driving an ambulance and jumping around, you're probably pretty active. And if you're on the crash team at Musgrove, you probably do a few miles. But there's a lot of roles in all of our organisations that people are largely sedentary. So the next two slides are just some data that show that Somerset is not worse, not better, the national average in terms of the proportion of our population that are physically active. But as a nation, we are not very active. And so comparing ourselves to England, I don't really want to be average. How many people in this room want to be average? I want to be, we'd love to be average. No, we want to be winning, Heather.
Indeed. Or do we want to be outstandingly average?
We want to be outstanding, you're right. You've set the bar, Bill. So we're going to be smashing that graph in a couple of years. And why we're doing that, next slide, is that people who stay active for longer, and that's not just physically active, but engaged in physical strength exercising and balance exercise, will live independently for longer. So that's the green line. The blue line is where you become physically dependent on others. You don't retain the capability to undertake activities of daily living. So we just want people to live independently, whatever that looks like for them, longer. And engaging in balance activity, strength and physical activity will mean that they can live independently for longer. And then ideally be economically productive as well for our communities and not dependent on our health and care services. So if we go to the priorities slide, which is number 9, Rish, I proposed 3 priorities. In the short term, we want to focus on getting those people from sedentary up to 100 minutes. And that's ideally our working age population, but our slightly older working age population. because we know that will give us an immediate gain. So it is about prioritisation, and it's saying those are the people we need to be more active to help them live independently for longer. In the medium term, I think there's a lot more we can do around reducing inequalities and targeting groups at greater risk of inactivity. And I think we know, particularly girls, participation in sport massively drops off and never really recovers. And I did say, I've been saying this a lot over the weekend, I did say to Chris Whitty on Friday, because he said he was going to update his physical activity guidelines, I said, they're not very inclusive. And he said, no, I absolutely recognise that. So they are going to do more about disabled people and participation in activity. And longer term, we want to ensure that physical activity is initiated and sustained across the life course. And we focus on groups where activity levels drop off. So if we go to the specific recommendations for the Somerset board, which is not the next slide, but the one after, Rish, this one. I had 3 bright ideas, and I don't know how you're going to feel about these. There's no point having this platform and being able to advocate for the health of the population if I don't ask you all to sign up to something. So the first one was really taking a place-based approach to physical activity. So we've got a really good physical activity partnership. It's run by a voluntary sector agency called SASP. Jane Knowles is fantastic, but Jane has said to me she has to be opportunistic and she goes where the money is. And we should, as a health and wellbeing board, I think, be a bit more strategic about this. We should be embedding physical activity into our commissioning. We should make sure that that partnership is representative from across the system and that we are deliberate in making our whole population more active, either through commissioning or just through making sure all of our partners are involved. So my first recommendation is to relaunch a system-wide partnership and make sure it's reporting into this health and wellbeing board, because it is such a foundation of good health. And with our shift to frailty, actually, hopefully, if we get more people engaged in strength and balance exercise, we'll delay being frail. So I don't know how you want to take these, Bill, if you want to debate each one or if I tell you all 3 and then we share thoughts.
Let's do all 3.
Okay. Second one is 25%, according to Copilot, of the working age population in Somerset is employed by public sector bodies, according to their definition. I think as anchor institutions in our communities, none of us are going anywhere. I don't think they're going to move to the hospital. The police force is getting the boundaries changed, but they're going to be around. And the council, I think you're stuck with us. So if we all invested in our population by saying we're all going to commit to being anchor institutions, one small way of doing that is investing in the health and wellbeing of our workforce and saying actually we'll commit to helping active travel to work, helping our workforce to take movement breaks, actually maybe having a free bike, not a free bike, you know, the bike vouchers for as part of salary sacrifice. We could really, as a collective, improve the health and wellbeing of the population. We could also do other things about being an anchor institution, make sure our contracts are actually invested in Somerset businesses. I was upstairs and a window broke and a company from Plymouth came to fix our window. I was furious. I mean, they were very good, but I was like, why are we using Plymouth window companies? We must have some sort of, anyway, that's a separate issue. And the last thing is that I really think that with our shift to neighbourhood working, David, physical activity could be a fantastic way of making sure that it doesn't feel just like a health plan, but it feels like communities are really part of that neighbourhood plan, that we've got health walks, we've got community initiatives, we've got sports teams and whatever it is in every community. And where we've got gaps, we do something about it. So those are my 3 asks really of the Somerset board. And I think this would shift us from being a board that sometimes we have very interesting presentations, but this would mean that we could demonstrate we were committed to something and we've changed something as a result of coming together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I loved this. I was so excited when I read it, which I rarely say, I have to be honest, about the papers for Somerset Board, because it's so understandable and so first step. We can all do something. I did wonder, for example, talking therapies now are very clearly understood and they're appreciated, and we could build in moving therapies, and that would work very well for voluntary community faith organisations, because they could adjust some of their support or their socialising activities to include moving. So I think that's a great step forward, small step, but we can all do that. And I thought it seemed like a really good idea to bring this back here so that we can embrace it across the system and everybody can do their bit and feel like they're contributing, because it's rare that we can find an opportunity across the system that all system partners can embrace. So I really celebrate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I like it too. I think it's really good. I think I get my head around the anchor organisation bit, but I mean, I think it's one of these things where it has to be many things. We have to do lots of little things rather than try and do something very big and grandiose that's going to work for everyone. Because I just keep thinking, I've just driven here. Liz and I share car. We share a car coming down here, but there is no way I could, by active travel, I could get here in the same month. Never mind the inclination to get on a bike and cycle as far as some of our colleagues do to cover long distances. So it's incredibly difficult. But I love the idea that you've done all 3 policy organisations and communities, because I think we have to tackle it on all the levels. I think makes loads of sense. So I'm very supportive of that. One thing we do have to be careful of course, with communities, we always say is we can't enforce something in a community. We can't stick it to them whether they want it or not. But I think there's that thing about mapping it and understanding what's there, because it's the other thing. But another element of community resilience is if young people and people in general have got things to do in their communities, they don't either have to feel left out or have to travel. So I like all of that stuff.
Likewise, I think this is rather brilliant, actually. I mean, particularly liking. So, as I walked in across the roundabout, well, not right across the roundabout, you know, from the train station, etc. There was an electric bike locked up outside, just one, and obviously we massively underperform some of our neighbours across the North Sea in terms of the proportion of the population regularly cycling now. I'm lucky in that I did grow up in Somerset and I'm not afraid to cycle, so I do almost everywhere. But vast majority of people I know of similar ages to me are terrified of the roads. So it's really a call for, again, for joining up. Both for joining up and devolution. Like, if we're really to make the communities review work, we've got to work to make what is a rather good, and I've said it multiple times before, local transport plan actually function with departments such as planning and highways, which it doesn't function with at the moment. And I'd encourage Somerset Council, just sort of thinking with my council hat rather than the other partners, to actually think about what can it practically devolve to towns and parishes to enable them to make good local transport decisions in the areas that they know far better than the officers sitting in Taunton. So it's like, what could possibly go wrong? But be braver in what you're willing to download in terms of local transport, or to devolve in terms of local transport planning. It's not just about assets, it's about how can the communities feed into all of the aspects of the council.
Thank you. Do you want to come back on that one, Alison?
Yeah, I would. I am a fellow cyclist, and I hear a lot of people are worried about active travel infrastructure in Somerset. I think when we took this through our executive, Bill, I'm not sure you were there. Some of the rules around active travel infrastructure and some of the standards and guidance are really hard for us to comply with in a rural area. And so we've got the local cycling and walking plans, LCWIPs, in our urban centres, but the evidence base around meeting the standards in rural areas is really hard. So the executive was supportive of me connecting with, I think it's Lancaster University, Adrian Davis, who used to work at UWE. And he's always been trying to tackle rural active transport networks, and there isn't an easy fix. So I can't comment on the delegation, but I think putting the infrastructure that is required in place is not simple.
Aware of that and very happy to engage in a discussion offline, like of the local local transport walking infrastructure plans. The one developed across Mendip was the best, and I'm aware it sort of butts up against the regulations in some of the larger towns where they started, but I'm happy to discuss that outside as to be part of the solution.
Yeah, it's there are some interesting bureaucratic idiosyncratic. I can't say the word now. That's the one. Idiosyncrasies in those regulations with active travel routes. And certainly, I wanted to extend a cycle route down to the gym and rugby club in North Petherton, which was all being extended as part of a new build development, and we just couldn't quite get the width in the pavement to tick the box for it to be a cycle route. It is used as a cycle route, but we can't paint a bicycle on it to encourage people to use it, and it just seems bizarre that we're in that situation. Anyway, that's just a little local anecdote. I've got David, I've got Rima, I've got Hilary, and I've got Sarah. David.
Okay, I'll be quick. So just to agree, Alison, I think there's a good opportunity within the neighbourhood plan to sort of bake this into it, and not in a kind of tokenistic way, but to kind of, to shape the conversations at neighbourhood around movement. So it's great timing. So thank you for that. We spoke about this at the Somerset ICB board last week. So this is the second time. So colleagues felt it was good the first time. It's even better the second time. I can say that. And we talked about it then in terms of our commissioning leads on Monday. And I guess there's a kind of, a request about what's evidence based that you could then start to commission against and bake into those commissioning conversations. And where do people go for that sort of level of information and conversation? So yeah, maybe some steer on that, maybe outside, would be helpful. And I don't know how that relates to then that system-wide partnership, and whether the sort of conversations and the content there, 'cause it's better to generate these things in partnership with providers than rather than do it from a commissioning standpoint on our own. So it's that kind of mechanics of it, but there's a willingness and a desire certainly to start to include this within the commissioning conversations.
I'm very happy to have a conversation with you outside of that. We've actually developed some guidance around supporting commissioning to include more physical activity, more public health influence and sway that we're utilising at the moment. One such example is we're working with our leisure commissioning team on the procurement of the leisure facilities as they're coming up for renewal again. So we've written some guidance, we've got it available, so we're very happy to support in supporting that inclusion in commissioning going forwards.
Clearly everywhere in the country they've been trying to do these kind of things. That the people who are more reluctant to do physical activity, you need to make it fun. And actually anything that reduces social isolation is going to get people moving. So that could be as simple as gardening clubs. It could be as simple as walking groups. And actually quite often it's cheap stuff. I think active travel, for all the reasons that have already been articulated, is a lovely ambition, but you're not going to get most of Somerset moving if that's not their current form of travel. They'll stick to cars or whatever they do currently. So I do think it's a lot more about working in the communities. I think it's the bullet point 3 I mean, within organisations, you get competitions between teams as to who can do the most steps in however long in a month or whatever, and that does work for a short time. But I think the sustaining bit is how do you do it socially so that people make friends and want to go because that's where their friends are.
Yeah, and it shows the importance of team sports and also initiatives like football, walking cricket, walking netball, and all of those other activities that that are around our voluntary sports sector. Hilary online. Hello, Hilary. We're looking forward to hearing from you. You may be on mute if you're trying to speak.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Thank you. Hey, we can't hear you now. Yeah, we think you've frozen. Okay, that's a shame. We'll move on to Sarah, and then we'll come back to you if we can, Hilary. Thank you.
I was just going to ask a little bit about how you think, or how your research shows this is about habit, because to me, exercise is part of your habit, your daily routine. And I'm not saying that I do it, but I've sat around much more since I've been on the council executive than I've ever done in my life. But, I know from my own children that they've all actually built some kind of exercise into it, even if it means getting up early and going for a walk before work, or going to the gym on the way home, or cycling to work, whatever it happens to be. So what I worry about is that I know there's a lot of people out there whose habits do not include exercise, which from what you've been saying from the figures. How do we change that? Now, yes, gardening clubs, all the sort of things that we think we might want to do, but if they don't want to do that, the message that exercise will really help you as you get older and really help you to stay fit for longer and out of hospital, all the things you want to do to stay healthy. But how do we get people to change their habits is the question. And it's the same with overeating, all those sort of things, but particularly exercise. If you're not used to doing it, now couch to 5K, great, all those things does require the person to actually say, I think I need to do this. So obviously it's the GPs, it's the people they meet across, it's the people they meet through social care who have to say, have you thought about doing a bit more exercise? Is that how you see that?
It's a really interesting point. And after Councillor Shearer's point earlier, I've been reflecting on, exactly how we enable more resilient communities within Somerset. And having benefited from a visit from Sir Michael Marmot last year, he has done a lot of work on obviously inequalities in health. And he alluded to the fact that it takes 5 generations to make a sort of a societal change within one family unit. And actually, for our young people now, it's that focus on that learned behaviour and that psychology around the fact that we need to embed this as the everyday norm for our children and young people. So while we might not see a demonstrable change now or in the coming few months, I think that change is going to be sort of a longitudinal effect, and we're going to be seeing those positive changes and that behaviour change around the perception of physical activity in the years to come based on the work that we implement now. That's the hope.
And to give you a bit of hope, because 5 generations is quite a lot, we do have a scheme that targets people that have had an adverse health event, so exercise on referral, which Lou leads. And that actually, I know that's after a health event, but actually the participation does carry on for a significant proportion of those people. So I think it's Rima's point, isn't it? Ideally, we go the fun way and we get as many people engaged in fun ways of moving. But actually, we should never give up that people don't see physical activity as part of their makeup. And even after someone's had a heart attack, there's still a chance that they can change their habits.
I think it's about making it that social element as well. Our Commission's Health Walk programme in Somerset is currently achieving 21,000 participations a quarter in health walks at the moment of varying degrees of difficulty. And it's just about constantly pushing those opportunities and encouraging people to self-advocate and take responsibility.
Thank you. I like it as well, but I think we're missing safe routes for active travel. I think we need to include as well the ability of organisations like this one to actually work on more safe routes for active travel, because when I'm talking to anyone about what I worked on for 4 years at Mendip and still working on now locally, if they're not keen on active travel, I just talk to them about the safety aspect for other people and also for drivers, because if you keep people using active travel routes off the road and off narrow pavements, they're actually increasing safety for everyone, including the drivers. So I just think that's missing from this slide, and the slide would be improved by including it.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to the first recommendation on the establishment of the partnership. So if the board were supportive of that, just to be, just to tighten up that action a bit more, to be clear on who will take that forward, and if there's a timescale attached to that, really be really helpful.
I'm very happy to take that forward, but obviously I can't do that on my own with Jane. We will be coming out to make sure that we get representation from across the system. Because I think that's the only way it's going to work. You know, if we embed it in schools, we embed it in adult social care, and we embed it in all of our NHS pathways. So happy if you are for me to take that forward.
Thank you. Have I got Hillary back on? She's not rejoined. And you wanted to come back?
Yeah, just another joining up point. The Somerset Place partnership was missing from the following slide. Which is obviously focusing on increasing activity along the coastal strip, led by SASP. So we've been called to a meeting at the end of the month. So that will be an opportunity to make this sort of hit the ground in some real communities.
I think so, because Jane chairs that one, the coastal strip, which is a bit of Somerset, and the overarching one, we want to sort of join all the different, because there's groups that work on active travel as well, largely out of our transport department. So I think there's lots of different activity going along that we just need to try and capture and work out where the gaps are. Thank you.
Thank you. Hillary, I believe you're back online. Shall we give it another go?
Thanks, Bill. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
I do apologise. I'm not going to turn my camera on just in case there's another glitch. So thank you for bearing with me. I just wanted to add, I've found the work that Alison's done really interesting. I'm very into all of that sort of physical activity stuff, especially point 3 around community. In this country, do we do things like walking school bus? This speaks to intergenerational sort of work, children being the future. Is this something that we do in this country?
There are people nodding around the room, so I think the answer is yes.
Is it something that we do in Somerset?
It's patchy.
We have patchy walking buses rather than outstanding walking buses, I think is the answer.
But I think the point about connecting, because the walking buses only work if you have enough volunteers, and most volunteers can't attend because they're working age. So you kind of need to join up a group of people that are willing to volunteer in a community with a group of parents who are willing to entrust their little darlings to the volunteers and get them to school. So it is absolutely embedding it into our working day, our school day, and they are really successful. So it's trying to get the coverage of those kind of initiatives across particularly areas of deprivation in Somerset.
And of
In
course, then
addition,
obviously you've got safeguarding the DBS checks as well, haven't you, on top of that?
Indeed.
So in addition to the walking buses, the majority of schools in Somerset also operate either a daily mile or a golden mile for all of their students, which is, it tends to be a safer option for the schools to implement, and actually gets the children, all of the children in those schools out doing a mile of walking, running, skipping, hopping within school time on a daily basis. That's been a huge uptake.
That's brilliant to hear. I think we just need to wrap this up because of time, but I think the general consensus is of being outstandingly impressed, if I can use that phrase, with this, and I think we're really excited to see how this will move forwards. Just one tweak, as you mentioned earlier, parish councils would see neighbourhood plans as being something slightly different on the last recommendation. So maybe a rephrase of that would be helpful. But other than that, I think it's outstanding. And if we can integrate that more across the county, I think that would be such a huge step forward.
Thank you for your support. We will take that forward and obviously seek to make sure all partners are represented. Just on the anchor institution idea, Bill, do you think there's any mileage in us revisiting that as a board at some point in the future? We can take forward the physical activity aspects, but that idea of us as organisations investing money but also in our people, is that something board members are interested to take forward? Devon and Cornwall Police Force, I think, have done it.
So
And the
yeah,
Devon Health Wellbeing Board.
can we put that forward on a forward plan?
Yeah.
And then we can get responses from individual organisations. If we did it collectively as a campaign, I think you're absolutely right. And then if we could involve the private sector as well through, I know that there's been significant work with the HPC project on attempting to use active travel with various degrees of success. I know Agritas, from their presentation to the executive a week ago, 2 weeks ago, it was mentioned as well. So there's some interesting work that could be done around that would be, I think, quite very influential.
It could be an aspect of our next workshop that's focusing on that economic and business work stream, because then it's sort of shifting that aspiration into something practical that we do. Thank you.
Excellent. Is that everybody? Good, excellent. Which does bring us on. We are running, as you might expect, a little bit late. Just looking at the last couple of items. We should be okay. So if we could take a 10-minute break now, please get out of your chairs, or else the Director of Public Health will have words. Thank you. Right, thank you very much, everybody. We're still going to try and get us finished by 1 o'clock if we can. So we're on to item 10, which is the Integrated Care Funding Framework. And we've got Alison and Paul presenting, I believe. Welcome, Alison. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. We thought it'd be a real good opportunity today to talk to you about the Better Care Fund and the fact that it's now transitioning into a new acronym of ICFF, which is the Integrated Care Funding Framework. Just to give you a bit of background, so obviously Better Care Fund's been around for a number of years now, pooled fund between council and ICB. We are working on our Q4 return at the we will be very shortly, but today we're here to talk to you about the 26-27 Better Care Fund as it transitions into that integrated care fund. Well, I can't even get it. Integrated Care Funding Framework. Thank you. All right. So next slide then, please. Thank you. So just to sort of allude to the fact that it is changing. We recognise that 26-27 is going to be a transition year, and it gives us an opportunity to start thinking about how we work better across organisations and with the Health and Wellbeing Board to look at what our future framework looks like. So we would like to take the opportunity to do that this year. It really does align to the new neighbourhood health plans. So we've talked about that earlier, but it is really making sure that we use any pooled funding to the benefit of neighbourhood health plans. 27-28 onwards then will be fully into the integrated care funding framework, and there are a number of areas that will still need to come out for this year around guidance around how we use the funding, how we can better use it for integrated services. There may be a consultation on some changes to the contributions, and making sure that we look at our funding framework together and as part of our plans. Next slide, please. So just a summary of the Better Care Fund for next year. So it's about how we have a consistent approach, how do we jointly fund our health and social care services. It is still going to be mainly focused on the key areas that we have within the current Better Care Fund. So very much around intermediate care services, the Disabled Facilities Grant, supporting unpaid carers, and deepening partnerships with the voluntary community and social enterprise sector. There are going to be no changes to the current system of minimum funding contributions, but again, we'll have more guidance on that throughout the coming year. And actually, the metrics that are currently used are also expected to be in place. So areas like non-elective hospital admissions for people over 65, average length of discharge delay for all acute adult patients, long-term admissions to residential and nursing care homes for people aged 65 and over, and obviously improving that reablement offer. Very much again, the national messaging is that we use the 26-27 year as our transition year to really have good plans in place that are linked to our neighbourhood health plans for 27-28. Next slide, please. So there's 3 national conditions. I won't go through all of these, but basically supporting delivery of integrated and preventative care, that we make sure we comply with our expenditure and grant conditions, and that we have effective governance, reporting and engagement in place. That is still expected to be there for the new ICFF. There are also metrics, sorry, next slide. There are also metrics in place as well that we need to look at. Again, very much mirroring this year's, but we need to be ensuring that we set specific goals as well, and that needs to be agreed through health and wellbeing boards. So we will look at those in a moment, but those metrics in particular are around the non-elective hospital admissions and the average length of discharge delay. So those are metrics that we need to agree on. We are then encouraged to set a goal with regard to long-term admissions for residential care homes and nursing homes. And then as ICBs, health and wellbeing boards, we're encouraged to monitor and drive improvements for the proportion of people aged 65 and over who were discharged from hospital into reablement care and then remained in the community for 12 weeks following discharge. Next slide, please. We've just got some performance slides up for you today. These are Q3 activity, and we try to update them as much as possible, but we are reliant on the SAS data, which is a national data set. But just to give you a bit of a plan on where we are at present. So emergency admissions for 65 years, we're actually in line with the plan at the moment. And again, as part of the conversation in a moment, we will look at whether we continue to agree with the metric that we've got and the goal that we've got in place. Next slide, please. Discharge on discharge ready date, we're actually behind plan. We have a plan as an ICB of 86.6%, and we're currently at 81.6% against the plan. So again, there's lots of work going on in this area that we can update you on at any future meeting as well. But there's a lot of work going on in the intermediate care space at this moment in time. Next slide, please. As is the average duration of discharge delay. So again, this is we are behind plan on this, where we should be at 6.2 days. We're currently 7.5 days. So again, there's some work to do around the average duration of discharge delay. And then the last metric that we are measured on is long-term admissions to residential and care homes for 65 years plus. And again, with this one, we are off plan, but as we're putting more people in placements than we are than where we were against our trajectory. So moving on to the next slide, where we're looking at our metric goals. The options that we've decided to bring today are in particular around non-elective hospital admissions. For part of our operational planning, the framework that has gone in is that we will have an ambition of 1% in underlying growth for our non-elective hospital admissions. Probably that's the area, if we want to align ourselves with operational planning, that is the option that we would want to take. Otherwise, if we want to be more ambitious, then we could create a bespoke ICS plan for the BCF, looking at that left shift from hospital to community. The average length of discharge delay, again, we are looking at how we can align with the operational planning ambition of having an average of 7.6 days. So again, that would show quite a big improvement on where we currently are. And then under long-term admissions to residential care homes and nursing homes, again, we would align to actual placement activity from previous years. There is an option that we could aim for a reduction on previous years, but I think given the demographic changes and the increasing volume of capital drops, that could make the target quite ambitious to achieve. So moving on to the recommended approach. For the plan for 26-27, the Joint Commissioning Steering Group, which oversees the BCF, is coordinating the plan on behalf of the Somerset Board. We are looking at largely keeping the 26-27 plan unchanged as we have previously, because it's a transition year. And we would want to really make the use of this financial year to work with the Somerset Board and looking at the plan for 27-28 and making sure that it aligns with the neighbourhood health plans. So areas of focus again are around that disabled facilities grant, the intermediate care, complex care and the social prescribing link workers. Our community equipment service and joint carer service are all contained within our current BCF, and those are the areas that we would want to continue to plan for in 26-27. Due to the timelines, we have to submit our 26-27 plan on the 19th of May. We would propose that the Joint Commissioning Steering Group review and agree the final submission at its meeting on the 23rd of April. And then we would like to share that plan with this board. But in the meantime, we would request that the board chairs are given delegated authority on behalf of this group to agree the 26-27 plan. And then finally, one of the areas, as we've alluded to, because 26-27 is a transition plan, we would really like to take the opportunity to work with this board on bringing together the future integrated care funding framework and the neighbourhood health plan and make that into a really good, robust plan for 27-28. So we'd like to propose running a workshop with you all to really understand what the requirements are. We'll be that further forward at that point with our neighbourhood health plans. So explore how our frameworks align with each other. We can then look at having a really good overview through this through this board around the requirements of the integrated care funding framework and the neighbourhood health plan, so that you take some ownership, you really own the plan moving forward as a Somerset board. And I think that will be really helpful, that we can then monitor it in a really robust way going forward. That's probably all I wanted to say today. Obviously, as I said, the guidance is changing, and we would like to kind of take this ball through that with us. Sorry, my voice is now going. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alison, Paul, did you want to add anything?
Nothing in particular. I think this year is going to be really critical for us going forward around how we redesign and implement the approach. In relation to the residential and nursing placements, it's quite a crude measure that we're asked to report on. So it doesn't look at the length of stay that somebody's in residential nursing care. And ultimately, we know we have reduced that length of stay to about 18 months now. So the time people are going in is a lot later in their journey. It doesn't mean to say the other challenges we have is around capital drops. So that's people with depleted funds. So ultimately, we don't really have a huge amount of choice on those. As long as they're in the right setting, we inherit them as part of our Care Act responsibilities. So for me, it's very much understanding that we're doing the piece of work around reducing number of admissions. There's a lot of scrutiny that happens over any placements going forward. So they have to go through our peer forum and enhanced peer forum to be agreed before we release payment for individuals. So I think we've got that covered in that element. So yes, but there is more work to do. You know, the length of time that people are delayed discharges and how we implement that. But that all links into our intermediate care transformation, that those who have been at scrutiny will be aware of that approach going forward, and our reduction in bed base to enable more community support at home.
Okay, just looking around the room for any comments or questions. Alison first.
Yeah, thanks for the work, Alison and Paul, and no doubt lots of other people. I'm just looking at the emergency admissions and thinking that when I heard you say aligning our Better Care Fund, I can't get the new acronym, and neighbourhood working, should we not be a bit more ambitious and say they should be integrated? Because it's like 1.6 or 1.7% of our population over 65 are being admitted as an emergency every month, and it seems like we could do a bit better than that, especially if we had neighbourhood working a bit more. And I'm just pushing a little bit. Should we be waiting until 28? I get this year's a transition year, but we've been doing this stuff for a while. So I'm interested in your views, really.
I'm happy to absolutely look at how we can promote that better and be challenging to ourselves. I completely agree. There's lots of other areas going on, lots of work going on in that arena as well, around how we proactively try and avoid admission for people. So there's a lot of work going on around in that space as well, because we know that once somebody gets to the front door, we then have, you know, big challenges around then getting them out into the intermediate care space and back home again. So trying to keep people at home is the best option, and we are putting a lot of work into the space where we are trying to do that out in the neighbourhoods as well, communities in the community space to do that through our care coordination work.
If I could just come back, and I've just wondered if there's any benchmark data, because we tend to be saying we're sort of looking at last year versus this year for ourselves. We'd normally take like 3 years of data and take an average. And I'm just wondering how other areas, maybe statistical neighbours, are performing, because we all know we have good years and we have bad years, and last year was quite a bad year. So if that's the baseline, then maybe we're not being ambitious enough. I'm just interested. I think why I'm really pushing this is we know what happens as soon as people get admitted to hospital. Hospitals are great places if you really need them, but they're not if you don't need to be there, and all the health impacts. So I think that's why I'm pushing for it.
I just want to reinforce that. I think we should be more ambitious in the reduction in emergency admission, and last year was lower than the year before, so we have brought it down anyway. I think we need to do a bit more to understand that, but we've definitely got to be more ambitious with everything we're doing around neighbourhood working and everything we're talking about. We've then got to be more ambitious about the impact of that, definitely.
Thank you. You know, these are perennial and very difficult issues, I know, and I think there's something in our area that is real, which I think is that the rurality issue for us around what kind of support we can have for people at home. Some of these communities that people are living in are very far flung and very tiny, so I don't know how much that affects us, but that's been the case all the time. I did understand that there might have been some contractual issues around the intermediate service, which I think is playing through and improving, which I think that, again, that would, I'd be interested to see what the figures look like subsequently. But for me, it's the same thing that Alison was saying, which is this thing about if we can align, this time, if we can align the hospital at home initiatives, the rapid response teams, have that across the entire county, but also a county area, but also the thing about having that community wraparound. So, you know, and these are lots of levers to pull. And that's why I asked that earlier on about kind of emergency care, because I think emergency care is another issue. So it's, I guess it's, yes, and I know you're being, you know, there's stuff you have to do for the government to get the money, but I think it's also about having the right sets of data for us to manage progress and to test ourselves to make sure we're doing all the right stuff. So I think at some stage it'd be nice, I would like to know more, either outside of here or in another meeting, about, you know, about that kind of exactly how we make this preventative, keeping out of acutes, getting out of acutes, how we're going to make that work across lots of disciplines and lots of agencies, because it's not just you know, it's not just adult social care, it is across the whole thing. Sorry, a wobbly one, that one.
Sarah?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, and I probably should know the answers, but I don't. But if you go into hospital, if you get admitted, you're going to come out at some point, hopefully. One way or another.
One way or another.
One way or another. And so is it the case that the planning for that discharge of whatever it is happens from the moment they get into hospital? Because that's really where you need to start doing it, because otherwise it's not going to happen quickly enough. So if it already does, that's fine. I don't know from an NHS point of view, but it seems to me that is crucial.
Yes, I agree. So it should, but it doesn't always. And that's something we're putting a lot of attention on. How do we get the in-hospital bit of that right? So that then when people are ready to be discharged, we know what the plan is and what's going to happen. And so only 15% of people are discharged with support. 85% of people go home without any ongoing support anyway. But it's those more complex discharges that clearly take more planning. But there's no doubt there's more we can do to stop them being admitted in the first place.
Because I mean, if you've got somebody who's got a difficult position at home in terms of not having a very secure home, if you put them in hospital, they might lose that home, and then they've got nowhere to go when they come out. So they might be better off with hospital at home, if they possibly could manage that, than actually taking them out and losing their place to live.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. I think there's more we need to be looking at from a community perspective in relation to our reablement offer in the community. At the moment, our reablement offer is at the back end of discharge, and we, you know, have a number of slots per day for people to be discharged at. What we don't have in Somerset at the moment, from an adult social care perspective, is a reablement offer to prevent people going into hospital in the first place. So I think we need to triangulate that. But it's also, for me, around how we knit all of this together, for want of better terminology, because we do have a lot of support out there in our community through our community agents, through our micro providers, but it's how we pull it all together to ensure that we're getting the right outcomes for individuals. And at the moment, I don't think we are clear enough about the achievements that we do get in those spaces. So it's about how we can move some of that forward, and that's some of the ambition we want to be doing over the next 12 months, because everything has been focused around the back end of our hospitals, and if we can transfer that to the front end, then hopefully then our hospitals will be in a better position.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, I was just picking up on the comments about the ambition within it, and also Heather's point about trying to draw these strands together, and very much Pick and Frailty is intended to get us into that space at a neighbourhood level, is to say, well, how do these services already in place, how do they work well together? Is there elements of overlap or duplication or gaps, as we suspect, and then how can we plug those gaps? Just in terms of the timing of it, clearly that work I've just outlined will take a bit of time. Some of it's happening already in some of the neighbourhood teams, but it's not universal across the county. And certainly the intent then through the course of this year is to get that focus within those neighbourhood teams. I think once they've done that and got their plan and their thinking done, it's more about the thinking that's articulated in the plan. It then provide a bit more of kind of information, if you like, in order to set a stretch then for future years. So it's just getting a bit, we're mindful will take a bit of time. There will be a lag between the intervention and the energy and the results that we get to see. And it's just that caution really about trying to go too quick, too soon for the purposes of this rather than other, but totally accept in terms of having the monitoring there to see and encouraging that ambition within the teams themselves. It's just reflecting in the BCF, I think, is the question.
Thank you. The term capital drop that's on the slide, do we not use a different term now?
Yeah, they can be intermingled really. So certain people will use capital drops, other people will use depleted funds. So it's either of the same, yeah.
And further to that, Chair, do we have concern about some personal cases I've come across where people actually put their assets out of the reach of the council in order that their family member is funded by the council rather than by family funds? And if that is the case, should we not be a bit more open and honest about that? Because I've certainly heard of it more. And if I'm trying to explain to people why their council tax is going up every year, and I talk to them about the amount of social care that is required in the county, I do also talk to them about people putting their assets out of the reach of the council, and therefore the cost on the council does continue to. Perhaps we should be more open about that.
I think it's thank you, Liz. I think it's a continual challenge, really, and people are more au fait with how to get around the system as such. Our FAB teams do a really good job, and they will go back over a number of years and check people's bank accounts. And I've heard of situations where some family members have bought caravans and done all sorts of creative things with their relatives' money. But we are taking a really hard line with these individuals now and charging those people for the cost of care for their loved ones, because we've been able to prove that they have gone around and taken the necessary to ensure that we don't understand where the person's finances are. I also think finances are much more complicated. When I started as a social worker, it was much easier. You have shared assets now, you have much more complexity around people's finances. So it does take longer for our teams to understand some of the situations that people are in, but we're doing everything we can to ensure that the council's funding is where it needs to be. But most probably there are areas that we need to explore more, and like you say, Liz, be clearer with the public around that area.
Thank you. Yeah, and roll on the Casey review. Who have I got next? Heather, did you want to come back on the point? Oh, it was Sarah. You were signposting Sarah. Okay, Sarah was next on my list.
Thanks very much. Just reflecting on the stage before people arrive at the hospital, which is often them being conveyed there by an ambulance. And if you look at a kind of global level across South Western Ambulance, we have consistently have the lowest conveyance rates in the country. And I'm just wondering if there's another level of insight or depth of intelligence that we could usefully be looking at that plays into this around understanding which segments of the population we're good at not conveying, and whether it is the people over 65, the kind of frail people, the fallers, or whether we're actually that those benefits are actually happening elsewhere, and whether there's a kind of correlation between the conveyances and the because if you don't convey someone to hospital, they're less likely to get admitted, obviously. to whether there's a correlation with what are the alternative options and the community assets that we have in place. And I'm just wondering if there's some insight and data that could be teased out as a helpful part of this conversation.
Happy to respond on that. Absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so that's something we're certainly looking at a lot through the care coordination work that we're doing. So really trying to understand what services we need in place to give a suitable alternative offer for our SWAST colleagues, and also working with the hospitals to making sure that if people do need to be admitted, they're admitted to the right area, not always through A&E, because obviously sometimes that can be not a great experience for people. So absolutely, we are looking at that, but we could certainly do that. We could certainly look at it a lot better. We've also done several audits with SWAST around front door audits about making sure, again, have we got gaps in services? Are there alternatives that we could be offering? So yeah, that's thank you for that. We will certainly have another look.
Okay. Not seeing any other hands up. No, we have some recommendations, which is exciting stuff because we normally just note things. So the recommendations are that the Joint Commissioning Steering Group coordinate the Better Care Fund on behalf of the Somerset Board. Due to the delay being published, it's suggested that the use of the BCF remains largely unchanged. As it's a transition year, the Somerset Board is asked to select and agree the preferred option for the 26-27 metrics, and with the required timeline, agree the final submission on the 23rd of April 26, and delegates authority to the Somerset Board Chair to sign off the final submission. Do I want that power? Or do I? Okay. It says chairs. But yeah, I no longer have a vice chair. Well, I used to have two vice chairs, and both have moved on to other things. I'm just starting to wonder. And agreed to have a workshop in the integrated care funding framework. That does not trip off the tongue, does it? No, we've got to come up with a better name than that. Are we all happy with those recommendations? We normally do things by general assent rather than anything remotely democratic. Excellent. Yeah, super. Yes, please do.
I think the comments about ambition and another year of time before we radically change things. It's, putting it crudely, I think it's almost the last chance in my mind for everybody. This is 4 years now we've talked about the Better Care Fund and trying to find a way through to make it do something. So I'm really keen that we don't come back in a year's time and go, well, not quite yet. It's just been a regular discussion about tomorrow and not immediately. So the ambition needs to be robust, and if we don't quite get there, that's better than having an ambition which is too easy and saying, well, that was all right then, because this is a significant amount of money, and somehow we have to really make it pay. Nothing comment.
Please don't apologise for those words of wisdom. I think we do recognise, that general frustration, I think, in the system generally, and the need to make best use of these funds while we wait for what fundamentally we all need is a longer term solution to how social care is funded. Well, let's not open up that can of worms because I'll be on this soapbox for hours. Agenda item 11, the changes to our board's terms of reference. Paul, Emily, Alison, thank you so much for all your work on that agenda item. Rizal.
Thank you, Chair. Mindful of time, so what I won't do is labour this point too much. I think we've talked today quite a lot about what we need to get done as the work of this board moving to next year. So really this item is sort of about enabling us from a governance perspective to be able to do that, make it as a little bit more flexible, a little bit more, I suppose, secure to some degree in terms of that quorum over the next year. So summaries have been of the changes that are being put forward are on a slide there. They've been shared with the board. I'm not proposed necessarily go through them all necessarily, but it is around, I suppose, changing some of the terms of references to exclude particular job titles where we know those jobs will be changing, to correct some errors that we've got in terms of existing job titles that are historic now. Also references to CCGs. There was also Sarah flagged this morning as well that the wording around the ambulance trust is incorrect in the terms of reference as well. So basically, there's a bit of a housekeeping to tidy this up and correct some initial errors that are in there, but also forward looking to almost broaden out just some of that wording around who is required to be here, and so we can be a little bit more flexible and dynamic with our membership moving forward and avoid not being for it when we need to make some of the important decisions we've covered today. So again, Chair, mindful of time, I don't want to necessarily labour this too much, so I'll open to any questions or comments from the members.
Dynamic and flexible. That sounds just exactly how we all want to be. Not seeing any comments, so I'm assuming that we're happy with those recommendations before us, to agree those changes and for them to go through the processes of the council governance procedures, and then a more comprehensive review once we know a bit more about other things. Good. Okay. And then agenda item 12, we've got reports to note, which are the Somerset Safeguarding Adults Board annual reports. Any comments or questions on that, or are we happy just to note? Not saying anything, that's clearly noted. And the Somerset 5-year strategic commissioning plan. Again, any comments or questions?
Just to flag for members, so this is I suppose the larger part of the pack to some degree, because it is all encompassing in terms of what it contains. But just to flag you, this was shared with you all via email a while ago now, so this is just sort of catching up now with this board's governance to note that it's been shared with you. It's been shared with you again as part of this meeting. I just wanted to check that you weren't thinking we've sprung it on you as a report to note you have been shared this.
Indeed, and there are a number of statutory things that we have to have noted. Which brings us to the end of this meeting. Just to note, the date of our next workshop is the 15th of May, and our next full meeting is the 30th of June. Thank you to everybody who's attended, whether in person or remotely. To appreciate everyone's input, and thank you especially to those people who brought reports and presentations before us for our consideration. And lastly, just to add my thanks to Mel, Lisa, and especially Paul for their time on the Somerset board. We do fully appreciate everything that you've contributed, especially Paul as vice chair has been one of the stalwarts of this group. So we do appreciate all the wisdom and experience that you've brought to us, and wish you well, and don't be a stranger. Okay. Thanks ever so much, everybody. Take care.